The story begins inside a lavish mansion, where a blind boy named Kunan sits in silence, surrounded by relatives flashing soft, sympathetic smiles. He's always been told his eyes would never function, and because of that, he often finds himself wondering what it even means to see. So his father explained it as the ability to recognize colors and shapes. The reason for Kunan's blindness, it turns out, is tied to a strange symbol etched into his eyes. The hero's scar, a mysterious remnant said to have come from the legendary knight Hister Hulia. His father told him it wasn't something to be ashamed of, that it was far from ordinary, and that Kunan should wear it with pride, not bow his head in disgrace. But even with those words, he'd still hear the maids whispering when they thought he couldn't, how tragic it was, how deeply they pitied him. And Kunan did hear them, but he just never understood why anyone would feel sorry for someone just for being unable to see. Later that same day, his magic instructor showed up, and a maid carefully led Kunan to the study. On the way there, he asked her if there was even any point in learning magic in the first place. So Aiko gently told him it'd be a shame to waste such potential. After all, he was born with a water crest, and that was no small thing. It meant he could wield magic, a rare and valuable gift, so it's something to be proud of. But Kunan still didn't see the use, and even if he masters magic, he'll still need someone to lead him around everywhere he goes. When they reached the study, the teacher introduced herself as Jenny and said it'd be an honor to teach him. Not long after, they began the lesson, and to everyone's surprise, Kunan nailed the first spell right off the bat. With just one attempt, he conjured a small sphere of water. Of course, since he couldn't see it, he didn't know what it looked like. Jenny explained that he had made a floating ball of water, roughly the size of an eyeball. Hearing that suddenly sparked something in Kunan. If he mastered magic well enough, maybe he could create new eyes with his power so he could see. And that tiny idea lit a fire in him. So from that moment on, Kunan held onto one belief. If he trained hard enough, one day, magic might let him witness colors and shapes the same as everybody else. Then one afternoon, while eating lunch, something unusual happened. Kunan got curious about what was actually inside his sandwich. And for the first time, he asked about the ingredients. So Aiko happily walked him through each one, describing every detail, and preparing meals for him suddenly felt more meaningful now that he was finally curious about what he was eating. After finishing lunch, Kunan's tutor Flora drops by to read with him and asks what story he's in the mood for today. Without hesitation, Kunan says he wants to hear about the legendary knight Hister Hulia. Flora pauses, clearly caught off guard, because she knows full well that Hister is the very hero tied to Kunan's blindness. The maid catches her hesitation and flashes her a confident thumbs up, signaling it'll be alright. Flora nods, agreeing to go ahead, but gently asks Kunan to tell her if the story becomes too upsetting. But he assures her it won't be an issue, saying he wants to absorb every piece of knowledge he can, no matter how heavy. As Flora begins recounting the tale, Kunan learns that ages ago, the world's champions clashed in a brutal war against the Demon King. Hister, hailed as the nation's greatest warrior, managed to strike down the Demon Lord. Though it cost him dearly, he emerged victorious, but with one arm and one leg lost in the fight. Ever since that battle, it's said that some of his descendants are born incomplete, missing limbs, eyes, or other parts of their bodies. So these children are often labeled as the hero reborn or bearers of the hero's scar. But even as he listens, Kunan quietly brushes it off as nonsense. Deep down, he knows this has nothing to do with him. His life isn't some echo of a heroic tale. It's his own, and what truly matters isn't a myth or a legacy. It's what he can accomplish through magic. He doesn't care about some legendary scar. What he cares about is unlocking the full potential of his power. And he's already made up his mind. He'll figure out a way to craft new eyes using magic, no matter what it takes. But the sheer amount of magical training he throws himself into eventually pushes his young body past its limits, and he ends up collapsing from total exhaustion. Aiko rushes to his side and hurries him back inside to rest. Once he's had time to recover, Kunan, more determined than ever, realizes he has to step up, both mentally and physically. And passing out from magic overuse just won't cut it for someone chasing a dream this big. So if he wants to wield magic for long stretches without faltering, he needs to toughen up his body as well. Aiko suggests he start learning swordsmanship to build endurance and muscle, and also eat more to support his growth. Still, she warns him that everything needs to progress gradually. Piling it all on too fast could do more harm than good. With his mind made up, Kunan dives into his new regimen under the guidance of Master Auro. The training is grueling and leaves him drained, But little by little, Kunan keeps up. The progress is slow, but it's steady, and that's what matters. When it's time for his magic lesson, Jenny arrives at the training field, and Master Auro quietly steps aside to give them space. Jenny approaches and remarks how impressed she is to see him picking up swordplay on top of everything else. Kunan nods, confirming that he's been working at it, explaining that if he's serious about his goal, he's going to need a ridiculous amount of stamina to back it up. Jenny had always seen Kunan as the quiet, brooding type, but today, he feels entirely different. There's no trace of that empty look in his eyes. Now there's purpose burning behind them. They get started on their magic session, and Jenny asks him to perform the same spell they practiced last time. Back then, Kunan had barely managed to conjure a single water orb. But now, without hesitation, he summons 7 of them at once. Jenny's stunned because she hasn't taught him any new techniques, yet he's managed to leap forward entirely on his own. That same afternoon, Princess Mirika, Kunan's fiancée, is set to visit. The idea of the meeting leaves her uneasy. Kunan's always been too withdrawn for her taste, and while she understands that this marriage is a matter of royal duty, the thought of being tied to someone so emotionally distant leaves her cold. But the moment she steps into the mansion, she notices something's changed. Kunan carries himself differently. He has a spark now, and their conversation flows in a way it never has before. He even shows off his progress in water magic, and to her surprise, she finds it genuinely fascinating. They spend the entire day together, and it turns out to be a surprisingly lovely time. On the carriage ride home, Mirika can't stop herself from blushing, her mind drifting back to the way he spoke, the way he smiled, and for the first time, she actually looks forward to seeing him again. As for Kunan, the encounter leaves him quietly reflecting. He realizes he's been overlooking Mirika all this time, taking her presence for granted. So with fresh resolve, he goes straight to Flora and asks her to teach him how to carry himself like a true gentleman, one worthy of Mirika's hand. That night, Jenny finds herself replaying Kunan's training session in her head. No matter how she looks at it, the fact that he effortlessly casts 7 water spheres at once is hard to ignore, especially since even she hasn't pulled that off before. It's becoming painfully obvious that Kunan has already mastered the fundamentals of water magic, which leaves her with almost nothing new to teach. Still, she needs to keep earning her paycheck, so she decides it's time to shift her teaching strategy. The following day, during their lesson, she introduces a new concept, breaking water magic down into separate stages, generating the water, suspending it in midair, and holding its form. To demonstrate, she conjures 2 orbs of water, one steaming hot and the other ice cold. Then explains that real mastery comes from controlling the nature of the magic itself. That's what sets seasoned mages apart from novices. Kunan takes her words seriously and decides to test the method right away. He uses his magic to fill a cup with water, then hands it to Aiko and asks her to give it a taste. She takes a sip, pauses, and then remarks that the water oddly tastes like apples. Jenny keeps a straight face, but deep down, she's fuming. Yet again, Kunan picked up something new almost instantly, before she even had the chance to break it down properly. That evening, Kunan doesn't sleep a wink. He stays up, training non-stop, determined to fully grasp the technique Jenny showed him. He focuses hard on visualizing apples, their shape, their fragrance, every little detail. He gets most of it right, but no matter how hard he tries, he just can't seem to picture their colors. This becomes a serious hurdle. If he can't imagine colors, then creating his own eyes through magic will remain out of reach. But Kunan doesn't back down and swears to keep trying, no matter how long it takes. By the next morning at breakfast, Kunan gives it another shot. He conjures a water orb and gently moves it above the apples sitting on the table. Suddenly, his body jerks upright, and his eyes widen in disbelief. Aiko rushes to him, concerned, and asks what's wrong. But Kunan's expression shifts to excitement as he blurts out that he can see colors. At first, Aiko assumes he's just imagining things, until he points to the fruit bowl and accurately calls out 2 green apples and 3 red ones. She checks, and when she realizes he's spot on, her eyes fill with tears of joy. Without a second thought, she throws her arms around him and squeezes tight, overjoyed at his breakthrough. Aiko then rushes to deliver the incredible news to Kunan's father, explaining with excitement that Kunan can now use magic to see colors. She adds that the closer an object is, and the more clearly defined its shape, the easier it is for him to identify its colors simply by touching it. Even more astonishing, she mentions that this ability now lets Kunan read books by tracing the ink on each page and recognizing the color of the letters. Though he hasn't quite learned how to read words just yet, she's confident that it won't be long before he figures that out too. Kunan's father is overjoyed by the update and swells with pride, feeling like his son is finally making real, undeniable progress. The next morning, Kunan decides to surprise Jenny before she arrives by showing off a massive red water orb he created using his magic. He's fully focused, carefully forming the spell, until out of nowhere, his entire family suddenly appears, and the shock completely throws him off. He loses control, and the red water explodes in every direction, soaking both himself and Aiko from head to toe. The scene leaves him looking like he's been doused in blood, which makes his mother scream in horror and faint. Kunan is left blinking in confusion, wondering what just happened, until Aiko calmly explains that blood is red, and seeing her son covered in it probably freaked his mom out a little too much. Kunan's father doesn't waste a second and sternly scolds his son for causing such a scare and declares that his allowance will be cut off for 2 whole months. Then he turns to Aiko and announces that her pay will be slashed for 3 months straight. The moment those words hit her ears, Aiko, who lives and breathes for her paycheck, passes out instantly. At the same time, hidden just out of sight behind a nearby bush, Jenny silently watches the entire scene play out. As she takes it all in, one thought crosses her mind. Kunan is far more gifted than she originally imagined, and at the pace he's growing, she can't help but believe he might one day earn the world's highest magical title, the legendary Cerulean Sorcerer. A few days later, Kunan's father brings up the idea of sending him to school. Hearing that, his older brother Ixio is caught off guard and points out that Kunan's never even set foot outside the estate. Gurion agrees but says that's exactly why he wants him to go, to help his little brother learn how to adapt to the real world. The moment hits Ixio with a flashback from when they were younger, back when he tried to guide Kunan outside to play. Kunan had been nervous, so Ixio offered to hold his hand the whole time. But just as he turned to lead him out, he tripped over the stairs and face planted. Snapping back to the present, Ixio hides his nerves and assures their father he'll do everything he can to support Kunan. The following morning, Aiko watches with amusement as Kunan plays around with a bowl of water. He explains that he enchanted the dish with magic and turned it into a fortune teller's tool for fun. Aiko jumps at the idea and asks him to use it to check if her long-lost youth is still alive. He grins and tells her she's still in her prime. Not done yet. She teases him by asking if he can tell her who her future husband will be. Kunan smirks and says that someone as gorgeous as her will never have a shortage of admirers. Flora watches the two bicker and banter, and starts second-guessing whether it was smart to teach Kunan how to joke like that in the first place. Later, Flora starts a lesson with him, all while Kunan keeps cracking jokes like a pro. She wonders if he's headed down the path of becoming a shameless flirt, but deep down, she's just happy to see how much he's changed. His smile is brighter now, and his mood lighter. After the lesson wraps up, Aiko takes him outside to meet his father. Feeling chilly, she asks him to conjure up some warm water balls. Kunan does so, but feels uneasy because he can't help but wonder why his dad would want to see him this late. Aiko tells him not to worry since he hasn't done anything wrong, unless you count that blood explosion incident a while back. Kunan fires back that she's the one who talked him into it in the first place, but he admits it was kind of fun. Before long, they reach the main estate where the head butler, Balin, greets them. Not long after, Kunan's older brother shows up and leads the two toward their father's room. As they walk, his brother asks if Kunan needs a hand getting around. Kunan quickly shakes his head, reminding him he can sense his surroundings just fine now. His brother nods, though the memory of messing up last time still lingers in his mind. Shortly, they step into a room where both of Kunan's parents are already waiting. Once Kunan and his brother go inside, Aiko and Balin stay outside the door. Then Gurion turns to Kunan and asks if he's open to the idea of attending a proper school. Kunan shuts it down immediately, saying he doesn't want to be a burden on others who'd have to look after him all the time. He adds that he's got something important he's working on at home and wonders if it's really that big of a deal not to go. Gurion explains that while it's normally mandatory for noble kids to attend school, he managed to get a special exemption from the emperor so Kunan could stay home due to his condition. Kunan's not thrilled, he suspects favoritism and says as much, but Gurion waves it off and tells him to stay focused. He tries once more to get Kunan to change his mind about staying home, but Kunan dodges the subject and instead asks if he can get his allowance back. That sets Gurion off, and the two of them dive straight into a heated back and forth. Thankfully, his wife steps in and reminds him why they're even having this talk. Regaining his composure, Gurion gets back on track and explains that this is about Mirika. He points out that any noble who skips their duties ends up shunned, and if she marries someone seen as uneducated, the backlash would fall on her too. That hits Kunan harder than expected, and after thinking it over, he finally agrees to give school a shot. Still annoyed by the whole situation, Kunon is at least a little comforted when Gurion clarifies that he doesn't have to attend full-time. Just show up for the yearly advancement exams. As long as he shows up 5 times for tests, he'll qualify for graduation, and that bit of news actually lifts Kunon's spirits. Ixio jumps in to remind Kunon that both he and Mirika are upperclassmen, so they'll help him settle in. His mom perks up, excited at the thought of getting her son's uniform ready. She calls Aiko and the two of them head out to get Kunon's measurements, with Ixio trailing after them. Gurion stops him just before he can leave, warning that some nobles might give Kunon and Mirika a hard time at school. Ixio takes the hint and assures him he'll keep an eye out and support his brother as best he can. The following morning, Kunon tells Mirika he's decided to enroll. She lights up, clearly happy that they'll get to spend more time together. Kunon admits he's a little nervous about being in a brand new place, so she tells him not to worry, she'll make sure he's taken care of. He thanks her, but can't help thinking that they might stir up some drama with her fanboys. When he brings it up, Mirika tries to brush it off like it's nothing, which makes Kunon suspicious. He asks if she's even popular at school, and she quickly sits up straighter, proudly saying that 5 guys have a crush on her. Kunon just sighs, realizing he'd better brace himself for dealing with some jealous punks. Afterward, Kunon slips into his uniform, getting ready for his first day at school. As he steps outside toward the carriage, Aiko can't help but gush over how good he looks, and Kunon fires back with a smug joke about his irresistible charm before climbing into the carriage. But right before they set off, he casts a water-based spell to coat the wheels in a soft gel. After saying goodbye to his family, Kunon finally heads off toward the city. While they're on the road, Ixio notices how smoothly the carriage is gliding over the rough ground. Kunon explains that he created the spell to absorb all the bumps, pointing out that no one wants to deal with back pain just from a ride to school. Feeling proud of his handiwork, he wonders if becoming a magical technician might not be a bad career down the line. Ixio then checks in, asking if Kunon's nervous, but Kunon shakes his head, saying he's a lot stronger than he used to be. He thanks Ixio for all the support over the years and apologizes for being a burden when his condition was at its worst. He also tells his brother to let go of the guilt over that accident, saying it's in the past now. Ixio's caught off guard, but Kunon stays firm and says that he's ready to keep moving forward, no matter how rough the road gets. Ixio smiles, seeing just how far his little brother has come from those darker days. But then Kunon suddenly takes it up a notch, boldly claiming that he'll live longer than the whole world just so he can enjoy life to the fullest. Ixio blinks, wondering if this new attitude has Aiko's fingerprints all over it. As they approach the school gates, Ixio is once again impressed when Kunon accurately senses the people nearby. Eventually, they arrive at the school entrance, and Kunon steps out of the carriage. Mirika hurries up to greet him, only for Kunon to start gushing about how beautiful she looks. She chuckles and throws his teasing right back at him, leaving Ixio watching in stunned silence. When Mirika turns to guide him inside, Kunon doesn't move right away. She looks back, a little puzzled. But Kunon is focused, listening closely to the dozens of voices echoing inside the building. Though the noise feels a bit overwhelming, for once he feels like he's ready for it. After taking a deep breath, he extends his hand toward Mirika and cheekily asks her to escort him like a dainty maiden. She laughs and agrees, taking his hand with a smile. In a quieter corner of the academy, Kunon's newly assigned tutor Cast kept glancing at the door, wondering why her new student was running late. She knew Kunon was the son of a marquess, and that thought alone made her doubt if someone as green as her was even qualified to teach him. Before she could spiral further, a bunch of girls nearby started squealing over a gorgeous newcomer. She turned to see what the fuss was about, and her jaw nearly dropped as Kunon casually strolled past with his fiancée clinging to his arm. Snapping out of it, Cast rushed to catch up and introduced herself as his instructor. Kunon, without skipping a beat, greeted her in an overly feminine tone, saying he was just playing the part of a graceful lady. Cast stood there frozen, completely thrown off, until the bell rang and spared her the awkwardness. Mirika and Ixio gave a quick goodbye, leaving Kunon with Cast, who now realized she'd probably drawn the short straw with this oddball student. Not far away, a few students peered through a window, eyes fixed on Kunon. One of them muttered that Kunon bore the mark of a hero's scar, and that small comment was enough to tick off Prince Lyle. Noticing his mood shift, his flunkies immediately backtracked, smothering their earlier compliments with half-hearted jabs. The prince then spun around and ordered them to follow him, clearly irritated. Back with Cast, she prepped a private room for Kunon's advancement exam. She asked if he understood the basics, and he gave a quick nod. She then went on to explain that although students usually had long breaks between exams, Kunon would be allowed to take his early. Kunan looked puzzled, so she added that his father had pulled strings with the king to make it happen. Kunan casually mentioned that his father was actually pretty tight with the king. Still, he couldn't shake off the guilt that his dad had to use favoritism to pave his way. He turned to Cast and apologized for putting pressure on the school because of his status, but she just acted like she didn't hear it. But Kunan didn't stop. He started venting about the messed up politics in noble society. Trying to change the subject, Cast silently handed him the exam sheet. Kunan didn't even glance at it, and just kept trashing his corrupt father until Cast finally snapped and begged him to leave her out of high society's messed up politics. Some time later, Cast sits down alone with Kunan's exam papers. After all the ranting he'd done about aristocratic nonsense, she figured his answers would be an absolute mess. But the moment she starts reading, her eyes widen in disbelief because he didn't just do well, he aced the entire thing. Meanwhile, Kunan strolls over to the cafeteria to grab lunch with Mirika. But just as they arrive, Prince Lyle and his entourage block their path. Lyle calls out to his sister, and Mirika immediately starts fidgeting with her clothes, clearly nervous. Curious who's trying to stop her, Kunan steps forward and comes face to face with the prince. A few paces behind, Ixio approaches and freezes at the sight of a noble confronting his little brother. Lyle wastes no time and throws a jab at Kunan, mocking him for getting engaged to Mirika despite his disability. Mirika's heart sinks, but she can't bring herself to defy her older brother. Kunan picks up on her silence and, without a word, decides Lyle needs to be taught a lesson. Before he can act though, Ixio steps in and tries to defuse the situation. But Lyle is already fired up and snaps at him to back off, so Ixio stands there, unsure of what to do. In the meantime, Kunan secretly casts a spell, drawing moisture from the air and nearby drinks, then sends it surging into Lyle's pants. Kunan then casually points at the growing wet patch and blurts out that the prince might want to check his trousers. The crowd around them goes dead silent before a ripple of gasps spreads through the room. Lyle panics and swears he didn't wet himself, but the damage is done, and with a red face he storms off to clean up. Ixio, already suspicious, turns to Kunan and asks if that little trick was his doing. Kunan just shrugs and feigns innocence, pretending he's just as clueless as everyone else. With the drama behind them, the three of them finally sit down for lunch. While munching on his food, Kunan asks who that jerk was, and Mirika quietly tells him that Lyle is her older brother. Kunan feels bad for her, wondering why someone like that would treat his own sister so badly. He looks over at Ixio and thanks him for always being a good brother. Ixio forces a smile, but inside he's freaking out because Kunan just publicly humiliated a member of the royal family. Mirika tries to brush it off and tells him not to stress, but Ixio knows deep down that trouble's coming. And somewhere nearby, Lyle storms through the hallway, seething over what just happened. Then, while Kunan and his companions are having their meal, the conversation circles back to what happened earlier. Everyone's still puzzled, trying to wrap their heads around why Lyle had confronted them so blatantly, without even attempting to mask how hostile he was acting. Mirika speaks up first, suggesting that Lyle's outburst was likely his way of trying to re-establish control over her. She reminds them that Lyle is the 6th prince, and she's only the 9th princess, which naturally places her lower in the royal hierarchy. However, ever since her engagement to Kunan, that balance has started to shift. Kunan carries the hero's legendary scar and has already built a reputation as a remarkably skilled young sorcerer, which sent her social standing soaring among the nobility. And now that Kunan has officially entered high society, it's safe to say that both of them are now seen as outranking Lyle. Kunan scratches his head, admitting that all this royal hierarchy talk is way too confusing for him to wrap his head around. Mirika laughs and tells him that none of it really matters. What's important is that she's happy to be with him. That makes Kunan smile, and he says he's glad to hear it. Still, he suggests maybe he should go apologize to Lyle just to avoid unnecessary drama later. But the second he says it, both Mirika and Ixio jump in to shut him down, telling him absolutely not to even consider doing something that's stupid. Time flies by, and soon the day of Kunan's final exam rolls around. Before heading out, he fits in a quick training session with Jenny. During the practice, he summons a floating ball of water and then cleanly morphs it into a solid orb of ice, shaped exactly like an apple. Jenny raises her eyebrows, clearly impressed, and remarks on how much he's improved in such a short amount of time. That afternoon, Kunan arrives at the academy, mentally prepping himself for the final test. As he takes in the atmosphere, he can't help but feel a little fired up because this place really looks and feels like a proper school now. Professor Cast walks up to him and wishes him luck, though she adds with a grin that he probably won't even need it, considering how sharp his skills are now. Soon after, a group of students gathers and asks Mirika to introduce her fiancé. Taking the hint, Kunan politely steps forward and introduces himself as both Mirika's fiancé and Ixio's younger brother. With a warm smile and respectful tone, he greets the group, saying it's a pleasure to meet them. His words and manners leave a strong impression, and in no time, everyone around him starts to think Kunan might just be the definition of a true gentleman. Meanwhile, Lyle stands off to the side, gazing silently out the window, already plotting his next move. His scheming is cut short when a few students call out to him, telling him to hurry because the final exam's about to start. Lyle scoffs, replying with a smug tone that he'll show up whenever he damn well feels like it. The others, clearly nervous, remind him that the exam is being held all at once, so if he doesn't come now, he's out. He turns to look at their faces and immediately feels his temper spike. Just by the way they're looking at him, he knows they've been talking crap behind his back, too spineless to say it to his face. That realization only pisses him off more. But right before he can unleash anything, Kunan suddenly steps up with a bright smile, grabbing Lyle's hands like they're old friends. Beaming with energy, Kunan cheerfully introduces himself, saying they didn't really get the chance the other day. Caught completely off guard, Lyle yanks his hand back and snaps, asking who the hell gave Kunan permission to speak to him, let alone touch him. Kunan quickly apologizes, but instead of backing off, he just keeps complimenting Lyle with genuine admiration. One praise after another, and before Lyle even realizes it, his face starts turning red. He tries to hold his expression, but the redness gives him away. The other students can't help but crack up, completely shocked to see Lyle flustered like that, as it's a side of him no one expected to see. Moments later, everyone settles into their seats, and the final exam begins. Time passes quickly, and when it's over, Professor Cass steps in front of the class to announce the results. Instead of writing names or numbers, she simply draws a flower on the board, her way of saying everyone passed. The classroom bursts into cheers as students congratulate each other, relieved and overjoyed to have cleared the exam. With everything wrapped up, Kunan hops into his carriage and waves goodbye, telling the others he hopes they'll meet again someday. As soon as he returns to the mansion, he jumps straight back into training with Jenny. She tells him to make a ball of water and split it into 10 equal parts. Kunan does it effortlessly, then adds that he's been working on something new. With a grin, he transforms one of the water balls into a small bird, and it flaps its wings and takes off into the air. Jenny watches, stunned and speechless. A few seconds pass before she drops to her knees, realizing with a heavy sigh that there's barely anything left she could teach him. Not long after, the two sit down for a quiet tea break. That's when Jenny finally gathers the courage to be honest with him. She tells Kunan flat out that she truly has nothing left to teach him. According to her, he's already mastered every form of basic magic, and once he moves on to more advanced spells, he'll easily leave her in the dust. She confesses that it's been like this for a while now. She just kept throwing together odd little exercises, hoping to stay useful somehow. The moment she says that, Kunan bolts upright in protest. He tells her he's known for a while, but it was those very exercises, random or not, that helped him expand his magic. He insists that without them, he never would have reached this level. Then he suddenly asks if she's trying to walk away because the pay isn't good enough, and says if that's the problem, he'll just tell his dad to give her a raise. But Jenny shakes her head, her tone quiet but firm. She tells him it's the opposite. She can't keep accepting such a generous salary when she's no longer earning it. She doesn't want to be paid like a teacher when she doesn't feel like one anymore. She walks over to him and gently places both hands on his shoulders, locking eyes with him as she says she's reached her limit. She repeats it clearly. There's nothing more she can teach him, but Kunan refuses to hear it. He begs her to keep making those exercises, even if they're just smoke and mirrors meant to fool him into thinking he's learning. He says he doesn't care if they're fake. If it helps him grow, then it's more than enough. Still, Jenny doesn't flinch. She meets his eyes and tells him, plain and firm, that she just can't do it anymore. After saying that, she turns her back to him and walks away. As she makes her way home, she thinks about everything Kunan has accomplished. The talent, the drive, the things she never imagined a kid could pull off. Then something sparks inside her. A fire she thought had long gone out suddenly ignites again. If Kunan can aim to become the cerulean sorcerer, then so can she. There's no way she's letting herself get left behind by her own student. It's not too late, not for her. Back at the mansion, Aiko informs Kunan that Flora has stepped down from her role as well. Now that he's officially completed the Noble Children's curriculum and graduated, her job, by all standards, is done. Kunan feels a little downhearted, realizing he never got the chance to properly say goodbye. But Aiko explains that Flora didn't offer any farewells because she knew she wouldn't be able to hold back her tears. Hearing that, Kunon decides he'll write her a letter, something sincere to thank her for everything she did. That evening at dinner, Kunon brings up Jenny's resignation to his father, Arsene Gurion. He explains how Jenny felt unqualified to keep teaching him, believing that Kunon deserves someone far more gifted in magic to help him move forward. While they sit and think it over, Iksho suddenly recalls hearing about an elite royal sorcerer known as Xianli. The name instantly grabs Kunon's attention. Without hesitation, he says he wants Xianli to be his next teacher. But before the idea can even settle, Arsene cuts in and shuts it down immediately. He explains that requesting a royal sorcerer is next to impossible. Those mages operate directly under the crown and don't take private students. They're too important to leave the castle and almost never accept outside requests. But instead of backing down, Kunon starts cooking up a plan. He says he'll tag along during his father's next castle visit, pretend to get lost inside, and when one of the royal sorcerers shows up to help him, he'll somehow charm them into becoming his mentor. Arsene doesn't even let the idea breathe. He shuts it down on the spot, calling it reckless and flat-out dumb. With a success rate that barely scrapes 10%, he tells Kunon to forget it entirely. But before Kunon can argue back, his mother chimes in, flashing Arsene the classic puppy dog eyes. That's all it takes. Arsene folds instantly, groaning as he agrees to bring it up with the king and see what can be done. A few days later, a Grand Master within the castle receives Kunon's formal request for royal tutelage. At first glance, the man barely gives it a second thought and is seconds away from tossing it aside. But the moment he notices the name Kunon Gurion, bearer of the hero's scar, he pauses, interest flickering in his eyes. A few days go by, and eventually Kunon receives a formal summons from the royal palace to present himself before the kingdom's royal magician. He boards a carriage alongside his father, who's visibly content with how smoothly everything has unfolded. Kunon casually comments that the king must share a pretty deep bond with his father if something like this was arranged so quickly, but his father corrects him, saying that the real reason behind this invitation isn't just old connections, it's because the court's head sorcerer has taken a genuine interest in Kunon's magical potential and personally requested to meet him. His father then asks what kind of spells Kunon can use at this stage, and Kunon immediately begins chanting before forming a small sphere of water, which soon transforms into a black cat that calmly settles on his lap. His father stares in disbelief, saying he never imagined magic could accomplish something like this, and reaches out to pet the tiny cat. He is shocked to find that it does not feel like magic or water at all, but exactly like any ordinary cat he might find wandering outside. Kunon explains that he only recently perfected its appearance, since before that he could only create animals that were completely transparent, though lately he has learned how to freely alter their color. His father happily plays with the cat for a while, prompting Kunon to ask if they should adopt a real one for their home. But like a typical father, he immediately shuts the idea down, insisting that cats would just make a mess around the house and that he would probably trip over one and injure himself. On top of that, he adds that Kunon's mother prefers dogs anyway, so the decision is not really up to him. Before long, they arrive at the capital and are welcomed by a silver-haired girl named Helga, the kingdom's second princess and Mirika's older sister. Kunon greets her cheerfully, saying he feels incredibly lucky to have someone as beautiful as her as his sister-in-law. His father briefly wonders if his son might be a bit too smooth for his own good, but decides to worry about that later. Helga smiles and says she has heard many stories about Kunon from her younger sister and would love to talk with him at length. She also notices the cat and asks if it needs any special food. But the moment Kunon's father sets it down on the ground, Kunon cancels the spell and the cat melts back into nothing more than a small pool of water. Helga quickly realizes that Kunon is far more talented than she originally assumed. While his father looks genuinely disappointed about not getting the chance to name the cat, Helga offers to escort Kunon up to the Black Tower, as his father mentions that he plans to speak with the king for a bit before possibly heading home. Kunon tells him not to worry, saying that after visiting the Black Tower, he's thinking about meeting up with Mirika and maybe taking her out somewhere. His father tells him to enjoy himself and promises to have a carriage prepared whenever Kunon decides to return. Helga soon leads Kunon toward the Black Tower and casually asks whether he's fine walking on his own or if he needs any help. Kunon says he's completely fine, then immediately starts bombarding her with questions that leave her utterly confused, since every one of them is insanely complex when it comes to magic. She tells him that she can't possibly keep up with such a deep discussion while walking and instead asks if he knows how many children the current king has. Kunon admits he never really thought about it, So Helga explains that the king is an absolute powerhouse who has 7 princes and 10 princesses. She herself is the 2nd princess, while Mirika is the 9th. But what makes their kingdom especially unique is that the line of succession doesn't follow the usual rule where the eldest son automatically inherits the throne. Instead, they practice something known as meritocracy, where every prince and princess is judged based on their abilities, talents, and dedication to their chosen path. Because of this system, even the youngest royal child has the same chance of claiming the throne as the oldest. Helga goes on to explain that she has already stepped away from her own claim by choosing the path of a mage, dedicating herself fully to refining her skills and becoming one of the country's greatest wizards. As they move through the corridors, Kunon suddenly feels an inexplicable pull toward a nearby window, where he stares absent-mindedly toward a dark tower in the distance, sensing countless different magical presences coming from it. Not long after, Helga shares something she considers extremely important, warning him that there is a real chance he could be dragged into the succession struggle for no good reason. She advises him not to align himself with any faction until he is absolutely certain of his stance, and cautions him to never say anything that could later be twisted and used against him to damage his reputation. In exchange for all that valuable advice, Kunon decides to return the favor by showing Helga a unique trick of his own. He freezes a thin film of water beneath his shoes, forming a slick layer of ice that lets him glide forward almost like he's skating. Helga instantly falls in love with the idea and excitedly tells him to try it on her too. Kunon quickly casts the spell again, and before long, the two of them are sliding through the corridors like a pair of reckless idiots, laughing as they go, while the guards scramble to chase them down since they can't risk Helga getting hurt. But sadly for the guards, Kunon and Helga are far faster than expected and manage to leave them behind. Their luck doesn't last long though, as a knight spots them and immediately gives pursuit. Kunon asks if they should stop, but Helga is having way too much fun and insists they can probably outrun him. That confidence turns out to be misplaced, as the knight catches up to them and drags them outside into the garden, where they receive a proper scolding. Afterward, they are escorted toward the tower, where Kunon is finally introduced to Rondamund Actard, the kingdom's head sorcerer. Just standing before him makes Kunon feel small, and he realizes just how vast the world truly is. He had thought Helga's magic was impressive, but compared to Rondamund, it feels like she's on an entirely different scale altogether. Rondamund immediately asks if Kunon was born with a water crest, and Kunon confirms it, though he admits he doesn't really understand much about crests in general. Rondamund explains that there are 7 types of crests a mage can possess, each tied to a magical affinity such as fire, water, earth, wind, light, darkness, and foul. On top of that, each crest is ranked from 1 to 5 stars, making Kunon's 2-star crest a fairly common case. Helga adds that she herself is also a 2-star wind mage. Kunon quickly gets it, joking that he can feel the difference immediately, saying that he and Helga are like American processed cheese, while Rondamund is more like an artisanal wheel of aged parmesan. Rondamund agrees that the comparison works well enough and then reveals that his own crest is actually 4-star. Right after that, he leads them down to the training grounds below and tells Kunon that he plans to test him a little to assess his magical ability. Kunon feels a bit nervous, wondering if passing this test might mean gaining a royal mage as a tutor. But he doesn't get much time to dwell on it, as Rondamund immediately calls over an older student who also serves as a royal mage and instructs him to display his water magic. The mage chants his spell, and in an instant, countless droplets of water bloom into the air, forming an intricate, shimmering pattern. Rondamund turns to Kunon and calmly tells him to overpower the boy's magic with his own. Kunon immediately recalls what Jenny once explained to him, that his talent isn't limited to creating water, but also extends to manipulating any water already present around him. Up until now, that has never been an issue, but he has never once tried to seize control of water created by another mage. He realizes that Rondamund has casually thrown him into a situation neither he nor Jenny ever considered, forcing him to adapt on the spot. With no time to hesitate, Kunon decides to try anyway and pushes his will toward the silver-haired mage's water. At first, it feels like it might work, but he quickly hits a wall as the droplets begin to resist, firmly held in place by the other mage's magic. Rondamund watches closely, clearly intrigued by what might happen next. Kunon refuses to give up, pouring all his strength and stamina into the attempt to force control. To everyone's shock, Kunon manages to tear 2 of the water spheres away from the seasoned mage before the spell is finally shut down. Kunon collapses to his knees, gasping for breath, while the silver-haired mage honestly admits that he never imagined a mere boy could wrest control of even 2 water spheres from him. He turns to Rondamund and declares that he would gladly take Kunon on as his student, only for the other mages to immediately speak up as well, all expressing their desire to have Kunon as their pupil. Rondamund shuts them down at once, saying he wants to see more of what Kunon can do, and tells Kunon to create something of his own choosing. Kunon immediately shapes his water magic into a trampoline, and without hesitation, Rondamund jumps onto it, bouncing around like he's having the time of his life. The other mages quickly line up, eager to try it themselves, wanting to understand how it works and whether they could replicate it. Rondamund, however, tells Kunon that he wants him to stay the night at the castle so they can further explore the limits of his abilities. Kunon apologizes and explains that he already has plans, since he has a date with Mirika and needs to take her out to dinner that evening. Right then, Helga asks if he can create any other animals with his magic, or even humans. Kunon answers that he can do both and immediately forms a human-shaped doll made of water magic, modeled after his maid. It isn't fully perfected yet, so the figure is still slightly translucent, and he hasn't fine-tuned the movements either, which makes it a bit awkward for now. The young mage then asks if the doll can actually do anything, and Kunon brings up the time he tried to make one fly, though it didn't go over well since the doll ended up looking pretty stupid while doing it. Rondamund instantly takes interest, leaving Kunon no choice but to demonstrate. He starts messing around with the doll, sending it flying back and forth through the air repeatedly, which ends up scaring half the people in the castle. This earns him yet another scolding, followed by a round of apologies from everyone involved. Before long, the sun begins to set, and Rondamund tells Kunon that he has officially passed the tests and that he will personally assign him a sorcerer to help refine his control over magic. Kunon is thrilled by the news and rushes to tell his father, who is far less pleased after hearing that his son has already caused trouble twice in just a few hours. He scolds Kunon for being reckless with his magic before storming off. Not long after, his father leaves to return to their mansion, leaving Kunon behind with Helga. She quickly realizes that Kunon needs to head to Mirika, or he'll end up late for dinner. Helga suggests that they use magic to get there faster, otherwise they won't make it in time, so they decide to try a little experiment. Kunon creates a large bubble of water, and Helga uses her wind magic to push it forward, sending them soaring through the sky like they're riding a magic carpet, reaching the area near Mirika's chambers in no time at all. Unluckily, Helga forgets to slowly ease off her magic, and cuts it completely, causing them to plummet straight down. They end up getting caught by the Knight Dario for the third time that day, who is visibly fed up and delivers yet another long lecture, while Mirika waits nearby in her dress, still expecting her Prince Charming to arrive. Mirika is a mess, pacing like there's thunder rolling inside her, completely on edge, half convinced Kunon's not gonna show. Her maid tries to calm her down, tossing out the idea that maybe he just got held up at the academy, and that's why he's running late. Luckily, before the stress eats her alive, there's a knock at the door. The maid hurries over, opens it, and finds a guard standing there with news. Kunon's finally arrived and is waiting just outside for the princess. By the time she turned back around, she was floored to see Mirika already lounging on the couch, sipping her tea like royalty, like she hadn't just been on the verge of a full-blown meltdown moments before. Before the maid could even open her mouth, Mirika had already slipped out the door, power walking her way straight to her fiancé. She spotted Kunon waiting at the bottom of the stairs, where he immediately apologized for showing up late, then hit her with some smooth talk, saying the moon looked stunning tonight, despite being blind as hell. He reached for her hand, which she gave with a soft smile, and just like that, he led her to his ride and whisked her off to a high-end restaurant. Once they stepped inside the place, the staff wasted no time offering them some overpriced sparkling water, fancy stuff only people with actual money would entertain. Not that it mattered, because these two weren't exactly scraping coins. As they settled in and started sipping, Mirika's maid quietly observed Kunon's polished posture, and the way he carried himself pure noble vibes. Mirika broke the silence first, asking if he'd had time to swing by the Black Tower today. Kunon lit up at the question, sharing how he actually met her older sister there and that every mage he encountered was straight up incredible, especially the second princess Helga. He added that he passed the mage assessment too, though he still had no clue who his mentor was gonna be. The guy kept laying on the charm throughout the night, and Mirika was clearly vibing with it, even if her maid still found some of it kinda cheesy. But hey, young love's messy like that, so whatever. After dinner, Kunon hit her with something bold. He gently held her arm and told her that while this kind of dinner might only happen once in a while for now, but after they got married, he'd make sure every damn night felt just like this. Even the maid, who usually rolled her eyes at this kind of thing, was caught off guard. Maybe those hours spent watching overly dramatic romance clips online weren't such a waste after all, because even she had to admit, Kunan might not be such a cringelord after all. Mirika kept her composure like a proper noblewoman, calm and graceful the whole way back, until the door shut behind her. The moment she stepped into her room, all that elegance vanished. She spun around and collapsed onto her bed, giggling like a kid, heart racing as she replayed everything Kunan had promised her, and she couldn't stop smiling. A couple days later, Kunan made it back to his mansion. He was tucked away in his study, busy scribbling down a report, when Aiko's voice rang out from the yard. She was knee-deep in laundry and called out for a hand, and right away, Kunan raised his hand and whipped up a bubbly storm of enchanted water that blitzed through the grime in seconds. Aiko gave him a quick thanks, but Kunan just sighed, saying he was in the middle of wrapping up that report and now it'd be delayed. Aiko rolled her eyes and told him to quit being such a shut-in bookworm. But Kunan explained that he needed to get it all down while it was still fresh in his head. Aiko shot back that nerds don't get girls, and if he kept hiding from the sun like some cave troll, he was going to end up short and scrawny. Kunan paused as the brutal truth hit him that girls really do go for tall guys. But Aiko leaned in with a teasing smirk and said she'd still pick him, as long as he was packing heat where it counts. They ended up chilling under the shade of some drying linens, and Kunan casually asked if a reply had come from the Black Tower yet. It was still radio silence, and it looked like they hadn't picked his tutor. But just a few days later, like magic, a letter showed up. To his surprise, the letter revealed that none other than Xianli, the devilishly charming archmage himself, had been assigned as Kunan's mentor. Kunan wasn't sure what to think. He'd only ever heard stories about the guy from his mother. But Aiko is fangirled hard, swearing up and down that Xianli was the hottest man alive, and immediately started spiraling about her weight and hair, panicking over how she'd look if she accidentally bumped into him. Meanwhile, over at the castle, Helga paid Mirika a visit and casually dropped the news that Xianli had been selected to teach Kunan. Mirika lit up with excitement, thrilled that Kunan would be learning under the best of the best. Helga, on the other hand, let out a sigh and admitted that she had secretly wanted the job. Kunan was way more fun than most students, and teaching him would have been a blast. While walking through the corridor, Mirika catches sight of her two older sisters, Everil and Ledalia, standing there with smug smirks plastered on their faces. She halts instantly like a deer in headlights, but luckily Helga's right by her side, which helps her keep it together. But Eve just has to open her mouth, pretending she's concerned while clearly trying to stir shit, throwing a jab about how everyone's been buzzing about Kunan lately. Then she drops the bomb, saying they're not even married yet, just engaged, so Kunan technically still has the freedom to fall for any other princess he fancies. That jab hits Mirika right where it hurts, making her visibly uncomfortable. But Helga doesn't let it slide, and she claps back without hesitation, calling both sisters washed-up F-tier nobodies, saying even if Kunan had working eyes, he still wouldn't waste a glance on them. That shuts them up real quick, their cheeks burning red with rage before they storm off, snapping that Helga should stop acting like a thug and try acting like a proper princess for once, especially since she's already been written up by a knight 3 times. Back at Kunan's estate, he's sipping on tea with Aiko, his mind drifting as he tries to picture what his new teacher might be like. Meanwhile, Aiko's off in her own world, blushing hard just thinking about Xianli and how she'll finally get to see him in person. Out of nowhere, a carriage pulls up outside. Mirika steps out first, catching Kunan completely off guard with her surprise visit, but he doesn't waste a second before turning on the charm, laying it on thick about how he needs mental prep to handle being near someone so beautiful. What he doesn't realize is that Xianli is still sitting inside the carriage, silently listening to every cringeworthy line, wondering what kind of mess he just got himself dragged into. Kunan, of course, is still going off, even making weird comments about how Mirika probably changed her soap. Eventually, Xianli's had enough and steps out of the carriage. Kunan freezes and instantly picks up on the overwhelming shift in presence and knows without a doubt that this man is Xianli. Aiko meanwhile is having a silent meltdown, but Kunan's too focused on the pressure rolling off Xianli like a storm cloud. His magical aura alone is enough to rattle anyone, and Kunan instantly knows that this guy isn't just strong. He's on a whole different level, leagues beyond any mage Kunan met at the Black Tower, and he might even be stronger than the Grandmaster himself. Mirika notices the look on Kunan's face and asks him if something's wrong, but he brushes her off and steps forward to greet Xianli, introducing himself properly. Xianli casually shrugs and says he couldn't care less, making it clear he has zero patience for bratty kids. Aiko meanwhile is baffled how a mage can be this damn rude. Yet somehow that bookworm brain of hers finds it kinda attractive. Xianli doesn't sugarcoat it. He flat out says he never asked for this babysitting gig and that the Grandmaster basically dumped it on him. Kunan, unfazed, just shrugs it off and says they're all stuck playing along with the rules of politics and seniority. So what choice do they have? Dario takes that moment to introduce himself properly as Mirika's personal guard, while Kunan gives him a quick apology for all the chaos he stirred up earlier. They eventually gather for some tea, but Xianli's clearly not thrilled, especially with how Mirika and Kunan keep tossing flirty remarks back and forth. Their back and forth gets so cheesy, he finally cuts in, tells them to cool it, and reminds them he's here to talk magic, not listen to some corny teen drama. With a smirk, he decides to mess with Kunan a bit and throws out a question and asks if the kid knows anything about compound magic. Kunan calmly answers that it's an advanced technique where the caster merges multiple spells into one. Xianli then pushes further, wanting to know how many spells he can juggle at once. But the answer that comes next catches him way off guard. Kunan tells him he can pull off 31 spells at once, and sometimes push it to 32, though he admits it gets shaky there. Xianli actually perks up at that and admits even he can't go beyond 50 spells, which blows Kunan's mind since he didn't think anyone could hit that number. Xianli asks him how the hell he broke through the 20-spell ceiling. Most people hit a wall there. Kunan just shrugs again and says he stacked a bunch of spells together like building blocks, one on top of the other. Xianli can't help but be impressed because he didn't expect someone to figure out that kind of technique on their own. It suddenly makes sense why so many other mages were pissed that he got the chance to tutor Kunan while they were left out, even though they were the ones who welcomed him to the Black Tower. Back then, Xianli didn't get what the fuss was about. Sure, they said Kunan was promising, but even they probably didn't realize just how much of a freakishly rare talent he really is. Xianli finally starts giving a damn and stands up from his chair, telling Kunan to prove he's not all bark and no bite, because he's not about to waste his time on a kid who can't back up his big talk. Then, without blinking, he tells Kunan to grovel and beg him to become his tutor. Mirika instantly thinks there's no way in hell Kunan would ever lower himself like that, only to be proven hilariously wrong as Kunan folds instantly, calling Xianli the greatest sorcerer alive, going on about how amazing he smells, and even joking that a straight guy like him could totally fall for a dangerously hot mage like Xianli. Xianli, creeped the hell out, tells him to cool it and zip it before things get any weirder. Then, to test the little freak, he raises his hand and casts a spell, and suddenly a thick wall of dirt rises up from the ground. He tells Kunan to destroy it if he can, using whatever tricks he's got. But just before Kunan makes a move, Xianli casually throws in a request and says he wants to try out that waterbed he keeps hearing about. Without missing a beat, Kunan casts a spell and summons a floating bed made of water. Xianli says he'll supervise from there, takes a seat, and the moment he touches it, his eyes go wide. Before he knows it, the man gets sucked into a dreamy nap, knocked out cold by the ridiculous softness. While Xianli's passed out in waterbed heaven, Kunan checks out the wall and immediately senses what's going on. The thing looks basic, but there's a thick layer of powerful enchantments underneath, making it damn near unbreakable. Turns out Xianli had stacked more than 40 layers of magic on top of each other. But Kunan doesn't panic. Instead, he calmly sits down next to the princess and pours her a cup of tea. He figures they'll just chill until the guy wakes up. Only then will he bother breaking it. 2 hours crawl by before Xianli finally wakes up, rubbing his eyes as the sun dips below the horizon. He looks around, sees his wall still standing, and asks if Kunan gave up. Kunan just sips his tea and tells him he was waiting, and now that he's awake, it's time. The boy walks up to the wall and uses a spell, releasing a stream of soapy water that gently eats away at the dirt. Slowly but surely, the wall melts down. Xianli watches, grinning, realizing Kunan didn't try to brute force it like most idiots would. Instead, he picked the clever route, and that moment seals it. Xianli officially takes him in as a student and tells him to be ready. Starting tomorrow, they'll be diving headfirst into every experiment he's got lined up. The following day, Xianli strolls in once again with Princess Mirika at his side, loud as ever and full of swagger, declaring that Kunan must be the luckiest kid in the kingdom to be trained by the most elite mage alive. Kunan, now a seasoned expert in shameless flattery, doesn't even hesitate and dives right in, gushing that clearly he's the luckiest guy on the planet to be taught by the most ridiculously handsome man in the entire world. Xianli smirks, clearly loving every second of it, but quickly shifts gears and warns Kunan that today's lesson isn't going to be a breeze, so he better not count on any favors. Kunan throws himself into a full-on soap opera performance, clutching his head dramatically and whining that if Xianli went easy on him, he'd assumed the love was gone. Xianli gives him a side eye, slightly creeped out by the clingy little weirdo, tells him to chill the hell out, and drags him inside. But the second they step into the room, Kunon's buzz crashes. Turns out, today's lesson is just copying Xianli's chicken scratch memos into clean, legible documents. Kunon instantly realizes what's happening. Xianli's just dumping his paperwork on him out of sheer laziness. Kunon was all hyped to dive into cool new spells, and now he's stuck playing secretary. Still, he knows there's no getting out of it, so he sucks it up and agrees. Xianli then waves the rest of the gang off, claiming the papers are top secret national intel that only he's allowed to see. Kunon turns to Mirika, apologizes for the delay, and promises to be back with her as soon as he's done. Mirika gives him a smile and heads out with the others. Once they're gone, Xianli casually tells Kunon to recreate that water bed he whipped up yesterday. Kunon casts the spell with ease, forming a soft, warm water mattress. Without a word, Xianli flops onto it and knocks out instantly, snoring like he's clocked out from life, and Kunon sighs and gets to work. Meanwhile, outside in the gazebo, Mirika pulls Aiko aside and quietly confides that she's been secretly training with a sword the past few days, but swears her to keep Kunon in the dark. Aiko's taken aback since it's pretty rare for a princess to pick up swordsmanship, but she nods and agrees to stay silent. Shortly after, Mirika suits up, grabs her wooden sword, and steps out onto the practice grounds to spar with Dario. It's obvious she's still green, but she's picking things up fast, driven by a fierce desire to improve. She's determined to become someone worthy of standing beside Kunon. She knows he carries the hero's mark, meaning fame and glory are basically guaranteed for him. So if she wants people to see them as equals, she'll need to earn her place with skill and strength of her own. Back upstairs, Kunon's still hunched over the ancient parchments, trying to make sense of the cryptic mess. The handwriting is so atrocious, it's nearly impossible to tell if he's looking at letters or some deranged attempt at a diagram. While he's in the middle of wrestling with one especially indecipherable memo, Xianli finally stirs from his nap, looking fully recharged. He glances over at Kunon and asks how far along he's gotten. Kunon replies that he's about halfway through, but instead of getting a pat on the back, Xianli fires off a jab, saying even a blind guy could work faster than him. Kunon fires right back, saying anyone would go blind trying to read that garbage. He says Xianli's handwriting is so bad, even a mud-covered worm smeared across the page would look more legible. Xianli scowls and tells him not to insult his masterful script by comparing it to lowly insects. But Kunon just shrugs and warns that he's definitely sending an invoice for all the unpaid labor he's been stuck with. Xianli tells him not to get cocky, that this is part of his training. Kunon looks confused until Xianli explains that reading from a book gives temporary knowledge, the kind that fades over time. But when your brain struggles to interpret something, and your hands physically write it down, the info sticks deeper. It becomes knowledge that's harder to lose. Kunon finally understands the point, giving a quiet nod as he realizes this roundabout method is still a form of training, even if it feels completely ridiculous. As evening rolls around, Xianli gets ready to head out again. He tells Kunon to make sure the rest of the work's done before his next visit. But just before he steps out, Kunon stops him and asks about some weird-looking markings on one of the memos, and they kinda looked like a spell. Xianli pauses, thinking it over, and says it'd be faster to show than explain. He tells Kunon to swing by the capital next time, and he'll demonstrate it in person. Kunon lights up at the idea and immediately spins toward the princess, promising that he'll see her again soon. The following morning, Kunon makes his way back to the capital and gears up to enter the Black Tower once more. As soon as he shows up, the royal mages swarm him, excited to see him again and throwing out a barrage of questions. But before he can get a word in, Xianli appears and tells him to follow. Helga stops Xianli with a horrified look and asks if he's seriously planning to take Kunon into that room, the demon room, but Xianli doesn't bother with an answer. He just turns to Kunon and tells him to summon the waterbed. Kunon casts it without a hitch, and just like that, all the nosy students are out cold and snoring. As they continue walking up the stairs, Xianli suddenly turns to Kunon and asks if he knows anything about magical weapons. Kunon answers that magical weapons are special gear capable of channeling a user's magic. Xianli nods in approval and explains that there are mages out there whose sole job is to craft magical weapons specifically for the royal magicians. With that, he opens the door to his study, revealing a space buried in layers of dust and littered with scrolls from wall to wall. Kunon's eyes light up, practically buzzing with excitement as he dives into the mess, flipping through scroll after scroll, stumbling across tons of spells he's never seen or tried before. As he digs deeper into the pile, he finds a rare magic book. one that's only handed out to elite royal mages, and proudly announces that he's about to pull some good old-fashioned nepotism to get his hands on it. He spins around, grinning, and tells Xianli that he wants to stay here forever. Xianli chuckles and tells him he doesn't need to live there because one day, the whole place could be his if he wants it. Then he shifts focus to a box in the center of the room, explaining that he's been developing a magical device for months, and the diagram Kunan saw yesterday was actually a blueprint of that very invention. Kunan steps forward and opens the box, only to find nothing inside. Baffled, he looks up at Xianli and asks what this thing is even supposed to do. Xianli explains that he's working on a machine that can give people whatever they want without lifting a finger. For example, if someone wants an apple, the machine would produce it. Kunan's eyes light up again, saying he'd love something like that, but with pancakes instead. Xianli nods and says that with Kunan's water magic, they can finally begin testing and maybe even release it to the public. He says his earth magic can handle the outer framework, while Kunan's water control is perfect for crafting the delicate internal mechanics. Kunan realizes this thing might actually be a game changer and agrees to team up with him on the project. Not long after, they head downstairs for lunch, where the headmaster of the mages starts chatting with Kunan about a legendary school of wizardry and witchcraft, a place where mages from every corner of the world gather to study. Kunan's never even heard of it, and the idea gets him hyped. But Xianli tells him not to get ahead of himself. Only mages who are at least 12 years old are eligible to apply, and since Kunan's only 10 right now, there's nothing he can do yet. 2 years fly by since that moment, and the day finally comes for Xianli to put Kunan to the test. They stand before Mirika and the others, and Kunan braces himself, ready to respond to whatever Xianli's about to launch at him with his water magic. Xianli gives a knowing smile and fires off a flurry of earth spikes, hurtling straight at Kunan. Without missing a beat, Kunan combines multiple spells, forming droplets of water that absorb the impact and bounce the energy back in the form of a crashing wave that breaks right at Xianli's feet. Xianli grins and declares that Kunan has passed. And Kunan, now glowing with pride, is absolutely thrilled with joy at hearing the words he's worked so hard for. After that, they head back inside the house, where Eiko brings out a magic pot that instantly produces a freshly baked pie using nothing but magic. Mirika takes a bite and says it tastes like it just came straight out of the oven. Even Kunan admits that their invention has clearly been a massive success in the market, though he can't help complaining that he hasn't seen a single coin from it, with all the profits mysteriously ending up in Xianli's pockets. Later on, inside the study, Mirika looks around and points out that Kunan and Xianli have already worked together on more than 5 successful magical devices. Kunan adds that another one is currently in progress, and that they've also published 5 new magic theories in their latest magic manual. Xianli turns to him and tells him not to worry about the unfinished device anymore, reminding him that he'll be turning 12 this spring and should start preparing for magic school. At first, Kunan flat out refuses to leave, insisting that Xianli is the only teacher he needs. But Xianli explains that as an earth magic user, there's a limit to what he can teach him about water magic. On top of that, the world is vast, and the magic school is filled with incredibly powerful water mages. Kunan still hesitates, but Mirika gives him the final push, telling him to go out and become a great sorcerer. She promises that by the time they meet again, she'll have worked on herself too, and become a woman worthy of standing beside him. Later that night, after saying his final goodbyes to Xianli, Kunan returns to his study and reflects on the past few years. He realizes that he's grown so used to sensing the world without using his eyes that he completely forgot his greatest dream, to create a pair of functioning eyes for himself. He understands that the only way to make that dream a reality is to grow stronger as a mage, and that can only happen if he's trained by a true water magic specialist. Several days pass as Kunan becomes consumed by the obsession of creating real eyes. He experiments non-stop, failing over and over again. Then one quiet morning, it finally clicks. He realizes he's been overthinking everything, chasing overly complex solutions when the answer was actually simple. All he needs is a mirror, something that can reflect the world and transmit that image directly to his brain so he can comprehend what he's seeing. With that idea locked in, he immediately gets to work. And before long, he opens his eyes for the very first time in his life and takes in the scene before him. Tears begin to fall, another first. Then he slowly walks around the room, staring at the books, then moves toward the window to see his own reflection. And that's when he notices a massive insect monster standing silently at his back. To his shock, the crab just stands there like a statue. And after a short while, Kunan starts to realize that this thing isn't really dangerous at all. shrugging it off. He turns back to his invention and uses magic to summon a mirror right in front of him. Ever since he chose the path of magic, he'd made a personal vow. Once he finished crafting himself a new pair of eyes, the first thing he'd do was take a good, long look at the one person he couldn't stand, himself. He remembers how his parents and the servants constantly went out of their way just to make sure he didn't end up hurt. As the mirror takes form, he finally opens his eyes and stares hard at his reflection. He notes that he's not very tall, and he doesn't even have the start of a beard. But then again, he's still just a kid. He turns back to the crab and tries to strike up a conversation. But the crab stays dead silent, still staring forward, completely motionless like before. Kunan calls out for Aiko, and she shows up instantly without wasting a second. She doesn't even spare the crab a glance and jumps straight into asking Kunan if he needed anything. Then she spots a strange floating orb of magic next to him, and more importantly, sees that his eyes are open. Her eyes light up as she excitedly asks if he actually pulled it off and gave himself working eyes. Kunan grins and nods, and Aiko immediately launches herself at him, cheering and hugging him hard. But in the process, she knocks the magical orb into the air, which spins wildly and leaves Kunan dizzy as hell. Laughing, she insists they tell his dad right away and says she's making a huge dinner tonight to celebrate him. Kunan looks back at the crab again, still staring with that same blank face, and briefly considers asking Aiko to toss it in the pot and serve it up for dinner. He turns back toward her, then suddenly notices something strange. She seems to have a horn sticking out of her head. He squints and asks if she's seriously got a horn on her head. Aiko laughs and tells him that the horn only pops up when she's pissed off, but disappears when she's feeling good. Kunan doesn't really know how to take that, but for some reason, he can't picture Aiko in his head with a horn at all. Then it hits him. If he's serious about leveling up his cold approach game and becoming a real natural charmer, he's got to start practicing now. So without missing a beat, he starts flirting, telling her the horn gives her a surprisingly fierce look. Aiko stares at him, totally unsure how to respond to that. So they both just head outside like nothing happened. This is the first time Kunan can truly see the outside world with his own eyes, and he stands out in the open field, staring ahead at a breathtaking view of wide grassy plains, distant mountains, and a castle standing proudly in the center. But strangely enough, what he sees isn't what any normal person would. Instead, all the colors look flipped, like the settings are messed up and never calibrated properly. The sun appears pitch black to him. The bright blue sky looks like a faded purple, and the grass has turned into a pale, lifeless blue. Even Kunan feels uneasy, because none of the books ever mentioned a black sun or a purple sky, and something clearly feels off. Aiko walks up behind him, helps him put on a cloak to shield him from the cold, and tells him they should head toward his parents' manor to share the good news. Kunan finally decides to ask the question that's been bothering him for a while and asks if she can see the giant crab standing right behind him. Aiko assumes Kunan is just spinning some fantasy nonsense and tells him that if he's making up a story, he should at least make her sound really cool in it. Kunan quickly realizes there's no point arguing with this woman, so they keep walking across the meadow, crab included, toward his father's manor. He knows the experiment was a huge success since he can see the world now. Still, something keeps scratching at the back of his mind, making him feel like something went wrong during the process, and that he shouldn't be seeing some of the things he is. Once inside the manor, he finally sees his brother for real this time, and his mother and brother are both overwhelmed with happiness when they hear that he can finally see. His mother breaks into tears, smiling as she looks at him, while his brother praises him for accomplishing something no one has ever managed to do before. Kunan, however, can't really focus on all this emotional nonsense, because what he sees is wild. His brother has a stunning pair of wings, looking like he just walked out of a pride parade. Meanwhile, his mother's eyes are two completely different colors. Kunan thinks they both look cool as hell and wonders why nobody ever mentioned any of this to him before. He tells his mother she looks like a heroine straight out of a princess play, and admits that even his brother looks ridiculously cool too. He turns to his brother and bluntly asks if their parents are some kind of discount angels. But like everyone else in this family, his brother treats direct questions like a personal attack and shrugs, saying he doesn't really know. Kunan then turns to Aiko and asks if people in this world can actually grow wings, only for her to dive into an overcomplicated explanation that answers everything except the question. She tells Kunan that everyone is born with wings, and he's just now unlocked his by reaching his full potential. At that moment, Kunan realizes he's completely surrounded by lunatics. He decides that the crab, the horn, the weird eyes, and the random feathers are all hallucinations, stuff only he can see, which clearly means something's messed up. Suddenly, he hears his father running into the room and wonders what kind of absurdity he'll see this time. And sure enough, his dad looks like he walked straight out of a messy game show punishment. His father joyfully congratulates him on the achievement and says he'll be sending word to the capital right away about Kunon's success. Everyone eventually clears out, leaving just Kunon and his brother behind. Kunon figures this is his shot to get some real answers and casually asks if their dad's always been such a dripping slimeball. His brother instantly tells him to shut it, warning that if their father ever heard such brutally honest words, he'd probably start bawling on the spot. Kunon just sighs and smirks, thinking how the combined weirdness of this family couldn't power a broken desk lamp. He decides it's best to save all serious questions for someone with a functioning brain like his teacher. The following day, his prayers are answered. A royal carriage rolls in from the capital, carrying Princess Sir Dario and Zeonli himself. Kunon rushes down to greet Mirika and welcomes her to the manor with open arms. Mirika is practically glowing with joy, thrilled that Kunon can finally see again. She praises him for accomplishing something no one else ever has. But Kunon still keeps his eyes shut tight, terrified that his future wife might look like a bug-eyed disaster. Mirika gently tells him to open his eyes, wanting him to see her for who she truly is. Kunon slowly opens his eyes and looks at her properly. He notices her dignified posture, her beautiful blonde hair gleaming in the sunlight like countless strands of gold, and her smile, soft and composed in a way that feels almost unreal. Just when he starts thinking that at least his fiancée doesn't have anything strange going on, he spots a single feather resting right on top of her head. He lets out a tired sigh at this absolute nonsense, but Mirika misunderstands it completely and starts feeling insecure, thinking he didn't like what he saw. Kunon immediately switches on his natural charmer instincts and reassures her, comparing her to a dove's feather drifting freely through the sky. Right then, Dario steps out of the carriage and casually adds that this dove has been improving rapidly with the sword, and at this point she's more of a hawk than a dove. Kunon then notices a stunning, ethereal sword resting on Dario's back and instantly asks about it. Dario, however, assumes he's talking about his regular weapon and starts rambling about the steel, how it was forged in fire, and how he once saw the process himself. Kunon quickly realizes that the glowing sword isn't real at all, and that his eyes are just messing with him again. Suddenly, he hears Zeonli's voice behind him and looks up, only to be blinded by an overwhelming golden light pouring off him, so bright that he can't make out anything through the glare. Kunon shields his eyes and asks if he's really the teacher, saying he can't see a damn thing because of how bright he is. Zeonli assumes Kunon is just flattering him and replies proudly that he's always radiant, overflowing with brilliance. Kunon has no idea how to get these self-absorbed idiots to understand what he's actually saying. Still covering his eyes, he tells Zeonli that he needs to talk to him in private and manages to drag him into a separate room, where he finally explains everything he's been seeing. Zeonli just bursts out laughing at how ridiculous it sounds, unable to believe that Kunon sees Mirika as a girl with a random quill sticking out of her head. Kunon snaps back, telling him not to brush this off, because he definitely doesn't want to marry Mirika while he's stuck walking around with a giant crab at his side, and his future wife has a feather on her head for no reason at all. Zeonli starts thinking about why Kunon's seeing the world in colors that don't match reality. After a moment, he narrows it down to two possible explanations. 1. Kunon might have unlocked the ability to perceive the shape of a person's soul, which would mean that the crab is a direct manifestation of his own. And the second is that Kunon could be dealing with a serious case of magic sickness, which is messing with his vision and making him hallucinate. Zeonli recalls a time when he passed through a forest so saturated with magical energy that it made him violently ill. He felt drunk, disoriented, and started seeing bizarre creatures floating around him. Kunon immediately feels like that matches his experience pretty closely, but Zeonli tells him they simply don't have enough information to say which theory is correct. Then, as a final thought, Zeonli mentions that every animal perceives the world in different colors, which doesn't mean their vision is broken. He tells Kunon to think of his own sight as a rare gift, not a problem. By the time they step back outside, the sun is already setting. Zeonli bursts into laughter again at the mental image of Mirika with a single feather sticking out of her head. That night, they all gather to celebrate Kunon's 12th birthday, which also marks the start of a brand new chapter in his life, because the very following day, he's leaving for the magical academy. So his father gifts him a finely crafted wooden staff, and his mother gives him a brand new quill set, and his brother hands him a thick book packed with food recommendations, basically the Yelp reviews of their era. Later that night, Mirika finally shares her gift too, a bracelet that comes as a matching set. Kunon tells her how much he's going to miss her, and promises to return to her as soon as he can. The two of them hold hands quietly beneath the moonlight, sharing a moment that neither of them will forget. The next morning, his entire family gathers to see him off. His mother is already tearing up, while his father tells her to stay strong because if Kunon sees her crying, he might break down too and won't be able to leave. To everyone's surprise, none of that happens. Kunon doesn't even slow down. He skips the hugs, climbs straight into the carriage, throws up a casual later fam, and tells them he might come back in a couple of years, or maybe not, who knows. And with that, he gets comfy next to Aiko and leans back, already imagining all the new faces he'll meet at the academy, and wondering just how powerful the sorcerers there might be. Kunon and Aiko keep traveling for 5 straight days, and after that Aiko starts getting restless and asks how much longer it will take before they finally reach the academy. Kunon explains that the academy is actually very far from where they are now, so realistically they should expect nearly a full month on the road before arriving there. He already understands that Aiko has made up her mind about not attending the academy with him, but he still asks if she is completely certain about that choice. Aiko answers that she has been of marriageable age for quite some time, and she wants to find a husband and settle down so she can truly begin her own life. She insists that if she keeps traveling alongside him, she will grow too old to secure any decent proposals. According to her, this is her only window of opportunity, because if she lets it slip away now, it would be the same as abandoning the idea of building a life entirely. Kunon attempts to guilt her a little and asks if she genuinely believes he can manage without her by his side. Aiko fires back that if that is really how he feels, then would he be ready to push Princess Mir aside and choose her as his bride instead? Kunon instantly goes silent, fully aware that he has absolutely no comeback for that, and shifts his gaze out the carriage window where he finally notices his grandfather's estate rising in the distance. They eventually reach the manor, and Kunon tries to recall the last time he visited this place. Aiko remembers it perfectly and points out that about 4 years ago, Kunon dragged his entire family here. The moment he discovered that his grandfather owned a massive library packed with magical texts, he became obsessed. Back then, he was desperately searching for any possible way to master magic, so he practically forced his family to travel with him. He even went as far as performing an embarrassingly dramatic viral dance routine until they finally gave in and agreed to make the trip. Kunon grins when the door behind him swings open and his grandfather steps out cheerfully with his arms wide, declaring that he missed him terribly. Kunon matches the enthusiasm and runs straight into his embrace, and the two of them begin hugging tightly. Kunon then glances with his magical eye and sees his grandfather with several demonic horns on his head, then mutters with a hint of sarcasm that his grandfather looks like a devil, while his mother is an angel. His grandfather then announces that to celebrate Kunon's acceptance into the magical academy, he will purchase absolutely anything he desires as a gift. Aiko quickly tries to step in, clearing her throat and saying that before he goes overboard, Kunon's mother asked him to read the letter she sent. But the old man seems to ignore her entirely and keeps asking Kunon if he wants precious gemstones, even calling out for a damn jeweler to be summoned right away. Aiko cuts him off again, insisting that he read the letter from his daughter first, so he brings it back into his study. He pulls out his reading glasses and almost instantly scowls because his daughter clearly anticipated his spending habits and placed a strict cap on how much he is allowed to spend on Kunon, stating that it must not exceed $5,000. He grumbles in frustration, arguing that $5,000 is practically pocket change in this economy. Kunon calmly points out that he is only 12 years old, and Aiko adds that $5,000 equals about 2 months of her salary. The grandfather, however, is still determined to buy something extravagant, whispering to Kunon that it would not hurt if they simply kept it a secret from his mother. But Kunon says the only thing he truly wants right now is a new maid, since Aiko will not be staying with him from this point forward. His grandfather promptly introduces the replacement maid Rinko, who turns out to be Aiko's younger sister and also has a horn on her head. She greets Kunon politely and explains that she accepted the position because her sister recommended it and the pay is decent enough. She mentions that she is saving money for her upcoming wedding and already has a fiancé, so she is not interested in any funny business. Kunon reassures her that she has nothing to worry about since he himself is engaged to a lovely fiancé, and says they should value their partners above everything else. Rinko nods, adding that she and her fiancé plan to open their own shop someday, so she is putting money aside for that dream too. Not long after, the maids begin setting up the dinner table. Rinko admits that she expected a spoiled, arrogant kid because he supposedly bears the hero's scar, but Kunon actually seems surprisingly laid back. Aiko explains that Kunan usually gets so absorbed in his magic that he sometimes forgets to eat entirely, so Rinko should keep some sandwiches ready for him to snack on while he works. That comment brings back a flood of memories for Aiko about everything she has experienced with him. When Kunan's father first hired her specifically to look after his eccentric son, she did not quite know what to expect. But over time, she grew genuinely attached to him, and they went through countless ups and downs together. She recalls the first day he put on his school uniform and the first time he managed to see her with his own eyes. The memories make her chest tighten, and she turns to Rinko, telling her that no matter how famous Kunan might be, he is still just a kid. That means he tends to trust people too easily, so it will now be Rinko's responsibility to protect him from any kind of danger, no matter what form it takes. Rinko says that Kunan has a naturally charming vibe and knows exactly how to flatter a woman, which basically makes him a walking magnet for every girl at the academy. With that kind of smooth talk, there is a real chance he could turn into a full-blown heartbreaker. Aiko cannot even handle the idea and snaps at her sister to cut it out, insisting that Kunan is a literal angel and would never stoop to something like that. The following day, Kunan finishes packing his things and prepares to leave when Aiko steps into his room to inform him that the carriage is set and waiting. He thanks her sincerely for everything she has done for him up to this point, saying he would never have grown into who he is today without her support. He mentions that it might be several years before they meet again, and Aiko tells him not to stress because she will be waiting and will probably be married by then, maybe even holding her own child. They share a tight embrace, and afterward Kunan climbs into the carriage with Rinko. His grandfather desperately asks him to stay and secretly live at the manor instead. But Kunan ignores the plea and signals the driver to move, leaving both his grandfather and Aiko behind. On the road, Kunan turns to Rinko and asks if she is truly fine leaving her fiancé for so many years, since it could be a long time before they reunite. Rinko assures him that it is not a problem because they already discussed it thoroughly. Since they are saving up for the business they want to start, the money is necessary. Kunan becomes curious and asks what kind of shop they plan to open. Rinko answers that they decided on a restaurant because she genuinely enjoys cooking, and if the place ever flops, maybe they'll end up on a reality cooking show and earn the privilege of being roasted by a world-famous chef. As the days pass, they gradually approach their destination until they finally cross into the kingdom of Durashik, famous for its deep connection to magic. They stroll through the streets, and Rinko quickly notices that nearly everything in town revolves around magic. While passing by a shop, Kunan spots several fascinating magic books displayed in the window and immediately steps inside to check them out. He is blown away by the variety available. But Rinko wonders what makes them so special when his grandfather already owns a massive library with thousands of volumes. Kunan explains that he has already finished every book in his grandfather's collection, and while there were not that many focused purely on magic, this shop specializes entirely in magical tomes, many of which are exceptionally rare. Rinko then questions if he plans to purchase anything, but Kunan tells her they would need to drop an insane amount of money for that. Rinko sneaks a look at the price tag on one book and nearly chokes when she sees that a single volume can cost up to $5 million. She says she could work several lifetimes and still not make that kind of cash, and that even a quarter of that amount would be enough to launch her restaurant and a few extra branches on top of it. Kunan just laughs and explains that these magical tomes are completely unique, which is exactly why owning even one costs a ridiculous fortune. Just before they step out, a woman wearing glasses approaches them and asks Kunan if he is a magician studying at the academy. Kunan gives her a polite smile and says he is only an applicant for now. The woman looks intrigued and asks him to demonstrate what kind of magic he can perform. Kunan decides to show off a little and conjures a tiny cat with his magic. The move lands perfectly because she instantly scoops the cat up and starts cuddling it, saying it is one of the most adorable things she has ever seen. Kunan asks if she is a magician too, but she replies that she was not blessed with enough talent for it. Still, she adores magic, so she chose to work in this field anyway. She adds that this year in Durashik will be especially intense because the saint from the Holy Kingdom is enrolling at the academy as well. Then she brings out a book, claiming it is a first edition written by the legendary sorcerer Zionli, and says she is willing to sell it to him at a generous discount. But Kunan politely refuses and walks out with Rinko. She questions why he turned down such a good deal, but Kunan calmly answers that the book was most likely a copy he personally produced back when he was collaborating with Zionli himself. Afterward, they step into another shop that sells every kind of clothing imaginable. Rinko begins trying on different outfits while Kunan runs his hands over the fabrics, carefully feeling the textures. He asks the shopkeeper what creature the fur came from, and the man answers that it was taken from a dark fox. Kunan pauses for a second, then casually creates a dark fox right there in front of him. The shopkeeper nearly jumps out of his skin because the animal feels completely real to the touch, which leaves him utterly baffled. So Kunan explains that he can reproduce anything as long as he understands exactly how it feels. The shopkeeper's mind starts wandering, and he awkwardly asks if Kunan could make a woman for him too. That comment sets Rinko off, and she snaps at the desperate guy to control himself, flat out calling him an incel before storming out of the store. They leave the small town behind and head toward the capital of Dirishik. After a couple of days on the road, they finally arrive and are immediately met with the sight of a massive magical academy, far grander than Kunan had ever pictured in his head. Rinko asks how they are supposed to handle living arrangements, and Kunan tells her to relax because they will simply apply for a dorm room where she can stay with him. But once they step inside, their optimism gets crushed when the receptionist informs them that every dorm is already fully occupied and that he should have submitted a request much earlier if he wanted a spot. Unsure what to do next, they walk back out, and Rinko suggests they might as well check into a hotel instead. Kunan shakes his head, pointing out that they are expected to remain here for several years, and living in a hotel for that long would drain their finances fast. He considers finding a place to rent instead. Just then, the receptionist comes after them and hands over a stack of flyers listing local real estate agents who can show properties nearby. Kunan's eyes instantly brighten at the thought of renting an entire house for just the two of them and living independently, similar to how he once did back in his homeland. That same day, they manage to secure a beautiful house located close to the academy. The following day, they return to the academy for the entrance exam. But the receptionist informs Rinko that she is not permitted beyond this point since only students and staff can enter. Rinko even attempts to slip her a bribe, but that tactic gets her nowhere. So she waits outside while the receptionist, whose name is Laubella, escorts Kunan down a hallway and out onto a wide grassy field where 3 other candidates are already standing, ready for their evaluation. Kunan forms his magical eye and scans the other candidates, noticing that each of them carries some kind of unusual hidden trait. Still, his attention locks onto the girl standing off to the side because there is something different about her. He approaches her and casually asks whether she is the saint from the Holy Kingdom, and she admits that she is, though she looks puzzled about how he even knows that since they have never crossed paths. Kunan explains that he simply wanted to speak with her because she is the first light attribute mage he has ever encountered in person, and he is eager to understand everything he can about that element. The saint sees no reason to humor him, firmly stating that light magic stands above every other branch of magic, so as a water mage, there is nothing he could possibly gain from her. The other applicants exchange confused glances at that claim, because magic does not actually operate on any kind of ranking system. Realizing she may have misspoken, the saint apologizes, explaining that she was merely repeating teachings drilled into her at the temple. While she has everyone listening, she also offers an advance apology, admitting she has been told she lacks many of the emotional responses most people naturally have, so even if she is speaking normally, she might unintentionally offend someone. She clarifies that her emotional deficiency stems from the influence of the hero's scar she inherited, and the moment Kunan hears that, his excitement spikes since it sounds like they might end up as 2 disabled best friends. The saint remains completely lost about what Kunan is implying. But at that exact moment, the professor overseeing the entrance examination arrives and instructs everyone to prepare. Kunan studies Professor Surf and immediately senses that the man possesses serious power, and Seifi is powerful too. However, her defining trait feels slightly unimpressive since it amounts to nothing more than several rats clustered around her feet. After giving their introductions, Surf and Seifi congratulate all 4 applicants on successfully enrolling at the Dirishik Magic School. The students are stunned by this announcement because they have not even been tested yet. Surf clarifies that admission here is practically assured as long as you are a mage. The saint is taken aback because she had been warned that the entrance exam was extremely challenging. Surf admits that the academy spreads that rumor intentionally to maintain an image of prestige. In truth, considering that all 4 of them possess magic crests, which are incredibly uncommon, rejection was never on the table. Kunan feels slightly let down after spending so much time preparing to pass the exam, but Surf reassures him that there will still be an assessment, so his hard work was not entirely for nothing. At this academy, students are divided into 3 tracks, and the first tier is referred to as fundamentals, where mages who are just starting out can study the core principles of magic. The second tier is labeled teacher assisted, which is essentially standard guided magic lessons. and the third tier is known as independent research. And it basically means your magical ability has already reached such a high level that you're allowed to explore however you like, as long as you stay within the law. Kunan feels a rush of excitement hearing this, since the thought of being allowed to pursue independent research sounds perfect to him. But Surf clarifies that the advanced tier is reserved only for elite mages, so qualifying for it and completing it will be anything but simple. Kunan's enthusiasm only grows because he's eager to find out what kind of challenge awaits him. But for some reason his upbeat attitude seems to irritate Seifi. The opening stage of their evaluation is a hands-on exam, so Surf instructs each person to step up one by one and announce their crest type, its rank, and how many spells they are capable of casting. Hank goes first, stepping forward and stating that he possesses a 2-star fire crest and is able to cast 7 spells. Surf then asks him to showcase his strongest technique, so Hank performs a fire trail spell. Kunan watches with interest because although the fire technique itself is basic, its special feature is that it travels along a route Hank outlines with his magical energy, giving it countless possible uses. When Hank finishes, a swirling pattern has been scorched into the grass, and Surf nods in approval before calling the next applicant. The next boy introduces himself as Rhea and explains that he holds a 2-star wind crest. He adds that he can perform 8 spells. Surf looks impressed and is quietly rooting for Rhea since they share the same wind affinity, though his final judgment will still hinge on how skillfully Rhea handles his magic. Rhea prepares to unleash his top spell, but before doing so, he cautions everyone to move back because it packs a bit of force. The group retreats, and Rhea lifts his wand toward the sky, drawing in a massive amount of magical energy before releasing a powerful wind surge into the ground. The technique he just demonstrated is intermediate level magic, pulling energy from above to generate a fierce gust, which leaves Kunan seriously impressed. The following applicant is Reyes, and she calmly announces that she possesses a 3-star light crest and can cast up to 5 spells. Her strongest technique is healing magic, but since nobody is hurt right now, she opts to demonstrate her second strongest ability instead, a concentrated beam of light used for offensive magic. Kunan is blown away because an attack made of pure light like that is nearly impossible to dodge unless you anticipate it before she even finishes casting. He is honestly curious to witness what other abilities her light element can unleash, but unfortunately it is already his turn to step forward. Kunan introduces himself and states that he carries a 2-star water crest, though he is limited to only 2 spells, the water sphere and the bubble technique. Surf is taken aback by this revelation, especially because he had been specifically instructed to make Kunan's examination unusually difficult. Kunan looks confused and asks what he means, so Surf explains that he received 2 separate letters of recommendation on Kunan's behalf. One came from the Grand Mage of Hulia, and the other was written by Xianli. The moment Xianli's name is mentioned, every student in the room reacts with surprise, since none of them realized Kunan had ties to such a renowned figure. Kunan is more shocked that everyone seems familiar with Xianli, but Surf clarifies that nearly every academic mage knows that name. As it turns out, Seifi shares a somewhat strained past with Xianli, which explains her cold attitude toward Kunan as his apprentice. In any case, because Xianli himself requested that the difficulty of the exam be increased, Kunan shrugs and agrees without hesitation. Surf then initiates the test by forming a swirling wind barrier around his body and informs Kunan that his task is to overcome him under those conditions. The spectators immediately assume the challenge is hopeless. Kunan only commands basic level water magic, and wind magic naturally deflects water spells with ease, making it seem impossible for him to break through Surf's defense. Yet Kunan simply gazes at Surf with mild dissatisfaction, as though he expected something far more demanding. Surf finds Kunan's bold confidence intriguing, but reminds him to actually pass the trial before criticizing it for being too simple, unless he is merely putting on an act. Kunan refuses to lose face in front of Reyes, especially since he still hopes to build a connection with her. So he accepts the challenge without hesitation, and begins by summoning dozens of floating bubbles that surround Surf from every direction. Surf is genuinely impressed that Kunan managed to produce that many, but he brushes it off, saying it is useless because bubbles like that will never penetrate his barrier. Kunan, however, is not even close to finished and calmly increases the number of bubbles, dyeing them crimson and sending them spinning violently around Surf's shield. Now, if Surf dares to drop the barrier, he will instantly be swallowed and carried off by the raging bubble storm. Even then, Surf refuses to admit defeat and tells Kunan he will need to raise the stakes if he wants to win. Kunan simply forms a chair out of water beneath himself and sits down like he has all the time in the world, telling Surf that the fight is practically settled already. He explains that he can maintain this bubble vortex for 2 full days without stopping, and since there is no time restriction, he is more than happy to wait until Surf collapses from exhaustion. After all, a spell like that barrier must be draining a ridiculous amount of mana, so Kunan estimates Surf can only hold it for half a day at best. As much as it irritates him, Surf realizes Kunan has outplayed him completely, so he admits defeat, and Kunan finally disperses the swirling bubble vortex. The moment it ends, Kunan immediately turns toward Reyes and starts pressing her to show him more of her magic. With this phase of the exam concluded, Surf gathers the students and escorts them into a classroom. But Kunan continues bothering Reyes, trying to convince her to demonstrate more spells. He even goes as far as inviting her out for a parfait date to spark her interest. Yet Reyes flatly refuses, saying she has no desire to show off her abilities. Surf cuts in, calls for everyone's attention, and tells Kunan to knock off the flirting because the next stage of the exam is about to begin, and Reyes needs to stay focused before her interview. Kunan nods in understanding, and Seifi calls Hank in as the first candidate. While Hank is inside, Kunan asks Surf what kind of questions the interviews involve. Surf admits he cannot give a clear answer since the subject shifts depending on who is being evaluated, so Kunan will just have to find out when his turn comes. With nothing better to do, Kunan starts asking Surf about wind magic as they wait. Surf does not mind and allows him to continue. After everyone else finishes their interviews, Surf asks Kunan what he would have done earlier if the battle had included a strict time limit. Kunan replies that if waiting it out had not been an option, he would have attempted to merge his bubbles with Surf's barrier and seize control of the wind itself. Surf asks him if he truly believes that is achievable, pointing out that he has never encountered a method like that before. Kunan admits he has never actually tested it, but his instincts tell him it should be possible, since seizing control of a spell from within ought to be far simpler than attempting to override it from the outside. In his opinion, water magic is the most adaptable element because it can slip through and infiltrate almost anything, though he cannot declare it the strongest yet since he still has not worked out the precise mechanics required to push it that far. At last, it is Kunan's turn for the interview, and Seifi arrives to escort him to the designated room. When they reach the entrance, Kunan pauses, slightly confused, because his magical perception cannot detect anything beyond the door. He asks Seifi to describe what is inside. Only then does she remember that Kunan is blind, and she quickly apologizes before explaining that the interior resembles nighttime. She offers to guide him in if he cannot see, but Kunan reassures her that he will manage and steps inside on his own. For the first time in quite a while, he experiences complete darkness, as even his magic eye fails to perceive anything. Then suddenly, his magic eye is forcefully dispelled, and he becomes aware of 7 presences encircling him. One of the figures advances toward him, mentioning that she was once Xianli's mentor. Kunan immediately interrupts and politely asks her to stop approaching, explaining that he is engaged and prefers not to stand too close to other women. The woman is taken aback, having heard that he was flirting with Reyes earlier. Kunan quickly clarifies that it was not flirting at all, only genuine curiosity about Reyes' magic, which is an entirely different matter. Deciding to move on, the figure asks whether he gained any new insights today. Kunan enthusiastically describes the remarkable varieties of magic demonstrated by his fellow examinees and says he intends to analyze them carefully and adapt similar techniques into his own repertoire once he returns home. Satisfied with his response, the figure informs him that he will be assigned to the advanced class, news that delights him. She adds that if he continues to excel, she may even consider accepting him as her direct disciple. Yet before she can finish speaking, Kunan has already exited the room, having lost interest in listening further. Though being dismissed so casually stings a little, she cannot deny that Kunan is extraordinary. The moment he entered, he attempted to perceive his surroundings with a spell unlike any she had encountered before. Even if it was not fully refined, she finds herself eager to see just how far his creativity will take him. Back at Kunan's house, his parents get a letter from Rinko letting them know that Kunan passed the entrance exam and even secured a spot in the advanced class. They're both incredibly proud of what he accomplished. But as they continue reading, Rinko casually adds that Kunan might have gone a little overboard during the test and basically turned the school lawn red with blood. And Kunan's father instantly loses his temper because he cannot believe his son would stir up that kind of chaos on his very first day. He even thinks about docking Kunan's allowance for a whole month as punishment. But then they find out the academy doesn't give advanced class students any allowance in the first place, so that threat ends up meaning absolutely nothing. When the advanced class students learn about this policy, They start getting uneasy since none of them realized the academy expected them to support themselves financially. Reyes in particular is clearly not okay with it, so she stands up and directly tells Surf that this rule is unreasonable. Surf calmly asks what exactly her issue is, and she explains that she enrolled to focus on magical research, not to stress about earning money just to survive. Surf responds by saying the academy's objective is to shape them into elite mages, and in his view, anyone who cannot generate their own income will never truly reach that level, which is precisely why the rule exists. That explanation only makes things worse for Reyes because her monthly expenses are around 1.5 million. And on top of that, she still has to cover the salaries of her 2 maids who also serve as her personal guards. So she genuinely has no clue how she's supposed to handle this situation. After that, the students are escorted to the private laboratories assigned for their research. Since Reyes just realized she's basically out of cash now, she nervously asks Seifi whether they'll have to pay rent for the lab space as well. Seifi reassures her that the lab itself is provided free of charge, but they must personally cover the cost of any research materials they use. They are free to work as hard or as little as they like, but if they fail to earn enough credits by the end of the term, they'll be downgraded to the regular class. Credits are awarded for accomplishments that receive a professor's approval, so Seifi wishes them good luck because the semester will not be easy. Kunan, however, feels completely confident. He's already earning a massive amount of royalty income from his joint publications with Zionli, and if he ever finds himself short on funds, he can always pick up work as a magic engineer. He then asks Reyes what kind of job she might consider doing with her magic, and casually suggests they talk it over while grabbing dessert at a parfait shop. But Reyes immediately rejects the offer. Later that evening, Kunan is at home when Rinko steps outside to call him in for dinner, but she quickly notices he seems a bit down, so she asks him what's bothering him. Kunan admits he feels discouraged because Reyes keeps rejecting his invitations no matter how many times he tries, so Rinko decides to offer him some honest advice. She tells him that if Reyes continues to refuse, he needs to know when to step back, because pushing too hard can seem disrespectful and will only drive her farther away. Kunan says he gets it, so Rinko changes the subject and asks whether he'll manage now that he has to earn his own money without an allowance. Kunan understands exactly why she's asking, so he reassures her that he'll still be able to cover her wages, so she doesn't have to stress about it, and Rinko feels relieved hearing that. Still, not everyone is as fortunate as Kunan, because at that very moment Reyes is having dinner with her maids. Now that it's officially confirmed she isn't allowed to receive any money or food from her family, they're stuck in a difficult situation. One of the maids feels guilty and tells Reyes she's willing to work without pay for a while. Reyes is glad to hear that since it would ease some of the pressure on her, but the maid quickly takes it back because she genuinely depends on her salary. In most cases, a mage in this position would simply use their magic to make money. But Reyes doesn't have that option, because the church strictly forbids her from profiting off her healing magic. So she's honestly in a really bad spot. The following morning, Reyes drags herself to school looking exhausted after staying up all night trying to figure out how she's going to afford her expenses. While walking through the hallway, she notices a long line of students gathered outside Kunan's lab. Curious, she asks what's happening, and they tell her that Kunan recently launched a business and it's wildly popular. She watches as an incredibly tired girl pays Kunan for a 60-minute sleep session, and after registering her, Kunan escorts her into the lab to get everything prepared. The rest of the students wait impatiently for their turns, but Kunan's lab space is limited and all the time slots are already taken. So he apologizes and explains they'll need to wait another 30 minutes for an opening. The noise and crowd catch the attention of Surf and Seifi, who come over to see what's going on, and they're genuinely impressed by how successful Kunan's little venture has become. Surf then turns to Kunan and asks him what exactly he's running here, so Kunan calmly explains that it's a sleep haven. He packed his lab with a dozen enchanted waterbeds, and because they're ridiculously comfortable, any student wrecked by research-driven insomnia can finally get proper rest. He came up with the idea because he understands better than anyone how brutal intense research can be on your sleep cycle, which is why he was sure there'd be no shortage of customers, even if he can only handle a handful at a time due to limited space. After listening to Kunan's proposal, even Surf gets sold on it, so he offers to secure a larger lab for him. In return, he asks that Kunan allow the professors to pay for the service too, since almost everyone in the faculty is chronically sleep-deprived. Kunan admits he'd feel slightly awkward charging professors for something like this, but Surf reassures him that it's completely fine and that they'd gladly pay without hesitation. Just like that, Kunan's little venture earns recognition across the entire academy, and every customer walks out singing its praises because they feel fully refreshed afterward. The glowing feedback attracts a non-stop stream of new clients, so Kunan is seriously stacking up profits. Still, a few students start watching him a little too closely, mostly because he happens to be Xianli's disciple. Later at Rei's residence, the lights go out because she couldn't cover the magical electricity fee, and the situation begins to weigh heavily on her since she never imagined life would get this rough. One of her maids suggests she talk things over with the professors, but she already attempted that. They simply told her to seek Kunan's advice instead, since he clearly has a knack for business. She hates the idea because she finds Kunan kind of strange. But at this rate, if she doesn't figure out a way to make money fast, she'll be living off thin soup and good intentions. The following morning, Rei goes to see Kunan, and as embarrassing as it feels, she swallows her pride and asks for his help. She honestly didn't want to approach him because there's no telling what he might ask for in exchange. But Kunan assures her she has nothing to fear since he would never exploit a friend's weak moment. He might request a favor someday, yet he promises it won't be anything unreasonable. Even so, to prevent any confusion, he calls Seifi in to witness their conversation. Kunan tells her he has no problem letting Rei take the lead on the project since she urgently needs the income, and they can settle the finer points later. He asks whether she's willing to partner with him, though it's not like she has many alternatives, so she agrees. Kunan is genuinely thrilled by her answer because it finally gives him the chance to experiment with her magic. Kunan reaches out for some assistance from Professor Shuriya, a fellow light attribute instructor, and luckily they're on great terms since she has profited quite a bit from Kunan's sleep venture. She informs him that she successfully secured the seeds he requested, then places them in his hands. When Kunan lifts the lid of the box, Rei is taken aback to discover Shishila seeds inside. Shishila is a holy herb of immense worth, so Kunan intends to cultivate them so Rei can market them for solid earnings. Rei immediately objects, explaining that Shishila seeds only take root in consecrated ground. However, Kunan had already looked into the matter and found that holy land simply refers to soil infused with natural holy and purification magic, so he reasons they can replicate those conditions by having Rei activate her holy sanctum spell. Shuriya is curious to see whether the plan succeeds, so the three of them stand by while Rei performs the spell under Kunan's guidance. Moments later, a radiant barrier of sacred light surrounds the seeds, and they begin to germinate, so both Shuriya and Kunan are thrilled that the trial worked. Kunan eagerly starts recording every detail he observes from Rei's spellcasting. Watching him beam with excitement makes Rei realize that all the times he kept pestering her, he probably was not attempting to woo her at all. He was simply fascinated by experimenting with her magic. That said, it is only partly true because although Kunan has no romantic intentions, he never skips the opportunity to tease. While drafting his notes, he catches Rei staring and casually asks whether she has secretly fallen for him, but she flatly denies it. Kunan already knows Rei is strapped for cash, so he suggests she could launch a healing service since countless people would gladly pay for medical restoration. But Rei explains she cannot, as the church strictly forbids using holy healing abilities for personal profit. Hearing that, Kunan searches for other options and mentions that certain scholars at the academy are willing to compensate those who gather experimental data. Yet mastering that field would demand too much time given Rei's urgent money troubles. Then Kunan gets another idea and asks whether any doctrine prohibits her from monetizing purification magic. Since the church's rules do not address that, he proposes partnering with Rei to create a magical tool together. At that moment, Shuriya interrupts and advises Kunan to ease up, pointing out that while his intentions are kind, shared patent rights over enchanted items can become complicated fast, so it would be wiser for him to think the arrangement through more carefully. Kunan feels a wave of relief when the experiment succeeds, because it means his 1 million investment wasn't thrown straight into the fire. Rei looks confused and asks what he means, so Shuriya calmly explains that each Shishila seed costs 200,000. Since students have to pay for all their own research materials, Rei didn't have that kind of cash, so Kunan covered the full million himself to make the experiment happen, planning to get his money back only after they sold the medicine if everything worked. Which also means he was fully prepared to eat the loss if the whole thing failed. Hearing that, Rei feels genuinely touched, and she turns to thank Kunan from the bottom of her heart for having her back like that. With the growing part done, the next step is turning the herb into actual medicine. So Shuriya guides them through the preparation method, and with a bit of support from Kunan's bubble magic, several Shishila pills are successfully refined. After that, they head out to find a buyer, and Kunan helps Rei's lock in a contract worth 2 million per batch, basically solving her money problems in one move. To celebrate, Kunan decides to take Rei's and her maids out for lunch. The maids are overflowing with gratitude, since thanks to him they can finally start earning again. And considering they've been barely scraping by for days, Kunan generously tells them to order whatever they like from the menu, wanting to treat them properly for once. A few hours later though, Kunan looks completely drained, because that treat ended up costing him 220,000. Sure, he told them to pick anything, but he definitely didn't expect them to casually start adding expensive wine to the table. He silently vows to be way more specific next time he offers something for free. Still recovering from the damage to his wallet, he heads back toward his lab, only to find Hank and Ria waiting outside his door. He asks what's going on, and they admit they're struggling to figure out how to earn money using their own magic, so they were hoping he might give them some guidance. Kunan almost brushes them off at first, but they look genuinely stuck, so he agrees to help on one condition: they assist him with a few experiments. He asks Hank to use his fire magic to cook bacon properly, and tells Ria to experiment with wind magic to see if he can achieve controlled flight. At the same time, inside Kunan's sleep sanctuary, the three girls who have been secretly keeping tabs on him unexpectedly run into one another. The moment they lock eyes, it becomes obvious they're all interested in the same person, and the atmosphere turns tense fast. After a month, Kunan presents his newest creation to the professors, explaining that it is a furless rat plush he designed for his sleep clients to hold while they rest. He came up with it after hearing feedback that even with his waterbed, some people still struggle to drift off without the proper kind of cushion, so he decided to solve that issue himself. He asks if anyone wants to test it out, but Surf gently refuses, saying he has a bad feeling that if he grabs that thing, it will be so unbelievably soft that he will never want to release it. With that settled, it is time for Kunan's big debut, so he bids the professors farewell and heads off to greet his exhausted customers. At the same time, Surf and Seifi discuss how smoothly things have been progressing with the new students. Kunan has managed to establish a remarkably streamlined and lucrative operation. Rei's is holding her own quite well, and both Hank and Ria have begun bringing in respectable earnings through their joint experiments with Kunan, making this year's advanced class look extremely full of potential. Even so, Surf is convinced it is only a matter of time before competing factions begin making their move. And almost on cue, the three girls who have been secretly watching Kunan arrive asking for him. When they learn he has already stepped out, they politely apologize for disturbing them and take their leave. At the same time, Kunan introduces his newest item to his customers, and the reaction is overwhelmingly positive, with everyone eager to give it a try and quickly reserving afternoon slots. After sorting through all the bookings, Kunan decides to step away for a short rest. Just then, he catches the unmistakable smell of Hank attempting the fire magic bacon he requested, so he forms a staircase of water and heads downstairs to check on the progress. Sadly, Hank has burned the bacon again, just like the previous attempts, and admits that it is difficult to perfect since he has never cooked anything like this before. Kunan offers a few pointers, reminding him that bacon turns out best when cooked slowly over steady, low heat. Hank says he understands the theory, but maintaining a consistent flame with fire magic for an extended period is far from simple. That comment makes Kunan pause and think for a brief moment. Yet he quickly regains focus and tells Hank that practice is the only way he will truly master it. After that, he moves on to Ria to check the status of the flight trials. Although Ria has successfully figured out how to lift himself into the air, he still has not mastered staying aloft, which results in him plummeting straight down. Thankfully, Kunan appears at just the right second to cushion his fall with a waterbed, and he advises Ria that learning to hover steadily should probably come before attempting another dramatic takeoff. At noon, Kunan tells the cook to use the batch of bacon Hank prepared to throw together a few sandwiches, and the cook goes along with it. Though he double-checks whether Kunan is absolutely certain since every strip of bacon he brought over was charred beyond reason. Kunan brushes it off, saying it would be a shame to waste perfectly good food, but adds that Hank is going to endure this disaster right beside him since he is the genius who cremated the bacon in the first place. Ria asks if he can grab a sandwich too because he is trying to cut down on lunch expenses, so Kunan happily invites him to join them. Then they bump into Rei's, who is more than willing to take advantage of a free meal, so the four of them sit down together to eat. But sadly, they miscalculated just how scorched that bacon truly was, and Rei's almost choked herself senseless trying to swallow it. At the same time, the three girls are still waiting for Kunan to return from his break. The second he comes back, They hurry toward him since they have something important to discuss. But the surrounding customers immediately shout at them for skipping the line and order them to move to the back. The girls quickly apologize and line up properly. And once it is finally their turn, they explain that they wanted to ask him something. However, their attention is stolen by Kunon's new pillow advertisement. And the moment he starts describing the custom pillow he invented, they completely forget why they came and decide instead to book a few hours of sleep with the premium package included. At the same time, Hank has resumed his bacon trials, and following Kunon's advice, he is concentrating much harder on maintaining a lower flame. Nearby, Rhea keeps training his floating control, while Reyes focuses on preparing a fresh set of sacred herbs. Seifi feels relieved seeing that everything appears to be running smoothly. Yet Reyes admits she still cannot grasp how forcing them to earn their own income is supposed to improve them as sorcerers. Seifi clarifies that mages like Reyes and the others have probably spent their entire childhoods doing nothing but research, supported financially by their families. But once they step into society, a mage can easily find themselves short on funds, and in that situation, there will always be questionable individuals ready to exploit their desperation. Reyes finally understands the reasoning behind the rule, and Seifi is pleased by that, though she suddenly recalls that recruitment season has just begun. So she casually asks Reyes whether any faction has tried to approach her. Surprisingly, Reyes says no one has contacted her at all, and the same applies to Kunon and the rest, which puzzles Seifi because she was convinced rival groups would be scrambling to secure new talent. In truth, the factions did dispatch recruiters, but those recruiters are currently fast asleep, completely unaware of why their plans have stalled. The following morning, Kunon and the others gather at lunch to talk through this entire faction issue. From what Reyes has picked up, these factions are organized groups made up of students from the advanced class. The three biggest among them are the Ability faction, the Harmony faction, and the Rationality faction. In simple terms, they function as cooperative networks for mages, especially useful when running large-scale experiments that need multiple participants. Though the only thing drifting through Kunon's mind is the idea of teaming up with a crowd of girls doting all over him. Students are free to join whichever faction they prefer, or not join one at all. Hank has already decided to set his sights on the Harmony faction, but the rest of them are still unsure which path would suit them best. For the moment, Kunon proposes they focus on eating today's bacon sandwiches, and Hank looks noticeably pleased since he managed not to char this batch into oblivion. But once everyone takes a bite, they quickly realize that while the bacon isn't burned this time, it tastes terrible anyway because it's overloaded with salt, meaning Hank still has a long way to go with his cooking technique. Afterward, the leaders of the different factions discover that their recruiters apparently spent the entire previous day sleeping instead of recruiting anyone, so they resolve to handle the matter personally. By coincidence, they bump into one another in the academy hallways. The instant their eyes meet, they all understand they've come for the exact same reason, to recruit Kunon. To avoid open conflict, they agree to settle it with a small game to determine who earns the right to approach him first. At the same time in the garden, Hank continues experimenting with his grilling process, but he's beginning to feel drained after working at it relentlessly for so long. Even so, Kunon reminds him that he's the one footing the bill for all the meat Hank keeps ruining, on top of paying him a proper wage to carry out these trials, so he really has no grounds to complain. Hank can't refute any of that since it's completely accurate, so he swallows his frustration and keeps going. At the same time, Kunon goes to check on Rhea's progress with his training. Rhea demonstrates that he has mastered hovering in midair, which genuinely pleases Kunon, but now it's time to push further. Kunon surrounds Rhea with a sphere of water and tells him to attempt actual flight. The bubble acts as protection in case he crashes into a wall or building during the attempt. Rhea is amazed at how effortlessly Kunon devised a defensive water barrier on the spot, and it drives home the realization that no matter how far he has come, there is always another level to reach. Meanwhile, in Rhea's hometown, he was celebrated as the greatest mage they had ever produced because of how devastating his spells were, and he took real pride in that reputation. But it's painfully clear that he's not even close to Kunon's level. For now, he needs to concentrate on getting stronger so he can make enough money to repay his family for scraping together the funds to send him to this academy. He's just about to head out when a massive blast echoes in the distance, and both he and Kunon spot what looks like a magical clash erupting beyond the line of trees. The ones throwing down are the three leading faction heads, and they're all desperate to claim the honor of speaking to Kunon first. So they're unleashing their strongest spells at one another while shielding themselves from incoming attacks, all to prove who can endure the longest. Kunon and Rhea have no clue what sparked the fight over there, But Kunon thinks it actually looks entertaining, and he figures he'd like to try something like that himself one day. At the same time, Hank is still grinding away at perfecting his fire magic cooking technique, debating whether he should crank up the heat or dial it back to get a better outcome. Then Kunon suddenly appears behind him and tells Hank he's disappointed with how rigid his creative approach has been. So far, all Hank has done is tweak the temperature of the flames he produces, and honestly, that's dull to watch. Kunon only agreed to bankroll this experiment because he wanted to witness a more inventive use of fire magic. So he tells Hank he needs to start thinking beyond the obvious if he plans to break through this wall. At that moment, Surf calls out to Kunon and asks him to urgently set up a waterbed for a professor who is completely exhausted from lack of sleep. So Kunon forms a staircase out of water and ascends to the window to lend a hand. Watching Kunon manipulate water, transforming liquid into solid steps, makes Hank realize he hasn't been tapping into the full scope of fire magic at all. Sure, he can regulate the flame's intensity, but he can also alter its color and even its scent, and that sparks a brilliant idea. There's no reason he couldn't produce a flame that carries the perfect aroma for bacon. Pushing the concept further, he might even be able to infuse the meat itself with distinct flavors using that same technique. So he gets ready to attempt it one more time. But before he can start, a member of the Harmony faction suddenly approaches him and asks if he would consider joining them. At the same moment, Rhea is in the middle of his very first flight exam. But staying airborne is way tougher than he ever imagined because he keeps smashing straight into buildings. He finally loses control and slams into the ground. And while he's trying to catch his breath, a recruiter from the Rationality faction approaches him and explains that if he wants to fly properly, he shouldn't be forcing the wind to obey him. Instead, he needs to let the current move naturally and simply steer it around his body. And the instant Rhea actually looks at her, he's completely head over heels. Not long after that, the group meets up for lunch like they always do. And to everyone's shock, today's sandwiches are genuinely delicious, so they immediately praise Hank for pulling it off. Kunon suggests that now that Hank has finally mastered bacon, he might want to experiment with cooking something else, but Hank is already ahead of the curve, so he proudly reveals an entire tray packed with different kinds of meat grilled flawlessly. Kunon is seriously impressed, but there's just one tiny issue. There's absolutely no chance they can eat all of that. Once Kunon points it out, Hank realizes he might have gone a little overboard. Luckily, they managed to sell the extra meat to the chef since the quality is top tier. And on top of that, this ends up becoming the foundation for Hank's own little business idea, meaning he can finally start earning money by himself. As they walk through the corridors together, Reyes asks Rhea whether he finally figured out the trick to flying, and he confirms that he did, though it's mostly thanks to some guidance from an upperclassman. Kunon is relieved to hear that because once Rhea truly masters flight, he could turn it into a courier service, and Rhea can barely contain his excitement. He also tells them that the same upperclassman invited him to join the Rationality faction, and he plans on saying yes, but definitely not because he thinks she's cute or anything, since that would be ridiculous. Since they're already talking about it, Hank mentions that he received an invitation to join the Harmony faction, and Reyes shares that she was invited into the Ability faction, though she still hasn't decided whether she'll accept. After hearing that everyone else got offers, Kunon can't help wondering why he's the only one who didn't, but they quickly explain that he's actually the hottest topic on campus right now. In fact, the leaders of all three factions are still battling each other for the chance to personally invite him. And when the fight finally wraps up, Ability is announced as the winner, with Harmony taking second place and Rationality finishing third. Since Bale earns the first opportunity to negotiate, he decides to play his strongest card and summons the most beautiful girl in his faction to try and charm Kunon into joining. Sometimes later, while he was in the courtyard carrying out aerial trials with Rhea, a girl named Aaliyah from the Ability faction suddenly approached him. After giving a polite introduction, she asked Kunon if he would consider joining their group. It was obvious she was trying to win him over with a little charm, and it was actually working because he immediately started going on about how adorable she looked. Kunon agreed on the spot, and Aaliyah left pleased with herself, confident she had secured him. The moment she disappeared from sight though, Kunon casually returned to focusing on his research like nothing had happened. He then told Rhea to raise himself a bit higher into the air. Rhea followed the instructions, but before they could continue, someone else walked up. She introduced herself as Elva from the Harmony faction and explained she was there to invite Kunon to join them. She was clearly trying the same sweet-talking approach, so Kunon responded the same way too, praising her appearance and instantly agreeing. Elva left with a satisfied smile. Yet the second she was out of view, Kunan completely erased her from his mind and shifted his attention back to Rhea, reminding him to maintain steady magical output or he would tip over. Rhea quickly apologized and corrected his posture, but what really bothered him was something else. He asked Kunan if it was actually fine to promise himself to the Harmony faction after already saying yes to the Ability faction. Kunan shrugged it off, explaining that he never refuses a request from a beautiful girl. And as if on cue, another visitor appeared. She introduced herself as Cassis from the Rationality faction and turned up the charm full blast. She invited Kunan to join her side. But this time he completely brushed her off and told Rhea it was time to leave, walking away and leaving Cassis stunned. Rhea stared in disbelief because he had no idea Kunan could act that cold towards someone so attractive. Kunan bluntly explained that he would have agreed if a girl had been the one asking. But he was certain the person earlier was actually a freaking guy, and that was not his thing at all. Just then, they ran into the real girl from the Rationality faction. She mentioned that Rhea had recently pledged himself to their group and thanked him warmly before turning to Kunan to extend the same offer. So naturally Kunan accepted without hesitation. Rhea was completely floored and rushed off to get someone else's take on the situation. Once it became clear that Kunan had accepted invitations from all three factions, the reality set in. Even though the factions were relatively calm at the moment, once word spread that Kunan had promised himself to every single one of them, it was almost guaranteed to blow up into a massive disaster. Meanwhile, over in the Ability faction building, Bale is holding a party to celebrate Bale's convincing Kunan to join their guild. He tells her she did a great job, and everyone cheers for her. But all of a sudden, the hall doors swing open as the members of the Rationality faction barge in, and Cassis immediately starts accusing Aaliyah of lying about getting Kunan to join the Ability faction. Bale has no idea what's going on, so the leader of the Rationality faction gains, apologizes and explains that there's a bit of a problem. They all agreed on the order in which the factions would be able to attempt to recruit Kunan, and the assumption was that after Kunan accepted one, he would naturally reject the others. But it turns out that Kunan accepted all three invitations, though technically he rejected the invitation from Cassis, but he came around on the second attempt. Something like this has never happened before, so the faction leaders aren't sure if Kunan is actually serious about joining all three factions, or if he was just saying yes to get rid of them. And the only way for them to find out is to ask him in person. All the while, Kunan is sound asleep in his bed without a care in the world. Meanwhile, back in the kingdom of Hulia, Princess Mirica has made a lot of progress in her training as a swordswoman, and she is now strong enough to single-handedly kill a bear in the forest. Nah, I'm just messing with you. Fighting a bear isn't exactly easy, so she gets her sword smacked out of her hands in a matter of seconds, and it's about to maul her to bits. But at the last second, it was taken out by her brother Lyle. He commends her for her bravery because if she hadn't kept the bear busy for that long, then he never would have been able to land a finishing blow on it. He tells her she's doing great as the vice captain of the Wild Bears party. But Mirica isn't happy about the way things turned out at all, because she still has a long way to go. At night, Mirica makes her way back to the castle, and the maids are already whispering about her since she's been heading out and returning late at night. Yet nobody has the slightest clue where she disappears to. Her personal maid is there to welcome her and lets her know that a letter arrived from the Senior Academy for Nobles regarding her final examination. A strict expression settles over Mirica's face because she fully understands just how intense that final exam will be. Then Laura mentions there's another letter waiting for her, and the instant Mirica hears it's from Kunan, all that tension melts into bright, unfiltered happiness. She quickly gets herself comfortable to read Kunan's message while Laura prepares a cup of tea for her, and the moment she begins going through it, she learns that Kunan has been busy experimenting with all kinds of magic since arriving in Durashik, even attempting something ridiculous like cooking bacon with fire magic, which is good. But when she reaches the section where Kunan brings up Ray's, Mirica stiffens at the realization that he has befriended another girl. The thought unsettles her more than she expected. Yet she decides she has no choice but to trust Kunan and believe he would never betray the promise they made to each other. The following morning in Durashik, as Kunan sits down for breakfast, Rinko tells him she plans to organize a proper ledger for the household spending. So she needs him to hand over a thorough breakdown of everything he's been purchasing. Kunan does not exactly object, though he questions why she requires his shopping notes, and she calmly explains that keeping precise records of income and expenses is essential if someone wants to build wealth. She then asks what he even does with the profits he earns from his school business, and Kunan casually admits that he just tosses the money into a drawer and forgets it exists until he happens to need it. Rinko presses further, asking whether he at least saves the receipts from his purchases, but Kunan confesses he never bothers tracking those details. Still, he recalls that he tends to jot things down whenever he buys something, so there should be a notebook somewhere filled with expense entries. The problem is he has absolutely no idea where that notebook ended up, which prompts Rinko to tell him to start searching for it immediately. Afterward, Kunan makes his way to the academy, and the second he walks through the doorway, he spots Reyes sitting there with a sandwich in hand. The scent hits him right away, and he instantly identifies it as one of Hank's bacon creations, which makes him want to get a taste for himself. But out of nowhere, Hank and Rhea both seize Kunan, insisting that he needs to disappear for a while. Kunan brushes off their urgency and casually asks Hank if there are any extra sandwiches left, which Hank admits there are, though that's clearly not the issue at the moment. Every faction leader on campus is in complete chaos because Kunan somehow accepted invitations from all three, and no one can predict what they'll do once they track him down, so Rhea keeps telling him to hide. Unfortunately, that option vanishes fast because several faction members have already laid eyes on him. They approach him and say they'd appreciate a pleasant conversation, and since they're all girls, Kunan stays totally unaware of the tension in the air and cheerfully agrees to go wherever they suggest. But before any of that, he absolutely insists on tasting one of Hank's sandwiches. Kunan pulls up a chair, grabs one, and takes a bite, and he's blown away by the upgraded recipe Hank experimented with, while Hank and Rhea stand there wondering how he can casually ignore the sharp, intimidating stares burning into his back. However, Reyes couldn't care less about the drama, because she's far more focused on the fish-style sandwiches Hank prepared. Kunan mentions he enjoys fish too, but since Durishik sits miles away from the sea, fresh catches are rare around here. The only supply comes from wandering ice mages who preserve fish with freezing spells during their travels and sell them occasionally, but encounters like that hardly ever happen. Reyes wonders out loud if fish farming inside the city might be an option, and Kunan admits he isn't certain, though he encourages her to look into it if she's curious. She then asks whether he'd back her up if it proves feasible, and Kunan agrees on the spot because the whole idea sounds like a fascinating project, which leaves Reyes pleased. Yet the faction members have run out of patience, so they grab him by both arms and haul Kunan away. He is soon escorted to the headquarters of the Ability faction, and he's stunned because he never realized a castle of this scale existed on school grounds. He's guided inside a chamber where the delegates from the three factions are already assembled, and the moment they come face to face with Kunan, the very first thing they do is formally present themselves. Bale offers Kunan an apology for hauling him over here even though he is not officially part of any faction yet. But the circumstances demanded quick action. As he explains himself, Kunan spots a massive black sphere hovering behind Bale as his unique trait, and he honestly has no clue what to think about it. As for Gaines, there is a pitch-black tree looming behind him, and this is the very first time Kunan has ever encountered someone with a plant-type trait. Then he glances toward Shilto, and there is a roaring thundercloud swirling above her head. Kunan barely spares it a thought though, because he is far more intrigued by the fact that one of the faction leaders is a girl, so he strolls right up to her and begins shamelessly hitting on her. Everyone is left stunned since they already knew Kunan tended to act sweeter around girls, but they had no idea he was this much of a flirt. Sandra then gets irritated and snaps at Kunan that he needs to treat this situation with some seriousness since he is the one who created this whole disaster in the first place. But when Kunan turns his attention to her, he notices that her unique trait is a swirling school of fish, so he figures she must be a water mage. He then casually invites her out for tea so they can chat about magic together, and Sandra starts to understand that Kunan might actually be kind of strange. From there, Gaines decides things might progress more smoothly if Shilto handles the conversation going forward, considering Kunan only seems to focus when a girl is addressing him, so she tells Kunan she has something she wants to ask. Kunan happily replies that he would gladly answer every single question she has over a cup of tea, and the others feel relieved that they are finally making some headway with him. They all head toward the main hall together, but on the way, Kunan crosses paths with Genevieve and immediately panics because Genevieve has that terrifying girl from the ring clamped over his mouth as his special trait, which is easily the creepiest thing Kunan has ever witnessed. A short while later, Kunan finally reaches the main hall and takes a seat with the faction leaders for tea. Bale asks him to make it clear which faction he actually plans to join, but Kunan is still too distracted replaying how unsettling Genevieve looked to answer properly. Yet when Shilto poses the same question, he snaps back to reality and says he intends to join her faction, or at least that is what he would like to declare. but he has already agreed to invitations from all three factions, and he despises going back on his word. So instead, he announces that he plans to join all three factions simultaneously, and he means it with complete seriousness. That concludes this episode. Thank you for watching. If you want to see the next part, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell.